You're hiding in a basement. It's silent. Outside, footsteps. Armed men are searching house to house, executing anyone they find. You're not alone. There are 30 people packed into this cellar. Some are crying, one is praying. You're holding your baby. She's 6 months old, and she doesn't understand the rules of war. She's starting to fuss. Then she starts to cry. The others are staring at you now. If she keeps crying, they'll find you. All of you. You can't stop her with food, or singing, or comfort. She keeps crying. You are handed a thick piece of cloth. Someone whispers what you already know. Cover her mouth. Hold it there. You might smother her. The question isn't whether it's right to kill your child. The question is whether it's right to not. This is a variation of a real dilemma faced during genocides and wartime massacres, a scenario where survival hinges not on fighting or fleeing, but on silencing life itself. It's not a philosophical riddle, it's been lived, and it's the kind of scenario where traditional moral theories collapse under the weight of reality. If you act, if you kill, utilitarian logic says you've saved 30 people. The math is cold but clear. 1 for 30, a tragic necessity. You didn't want to kill her, but what's the alternative? Let her cry, and 30 die. But even this logic has a blind spot, because it assumes you know the outcome. It assumes that killing her guarantees survival. It doesn't. They might find you anyway. They might burn the house down. You might kill your child for nothing, and can't. He's no help here. His ethics say you must never use another human as a means to an end. Not even your baby. Not even if it saves the world. In this view, suffocating your child is murder, an act that destroys your own humanity, no matter the justification. So which is worse, to let the world die with your baby's cry, or to live in a world where you killed her yourself? Even virtue ethics, the idea that morality is about cultivating a good character, collapses here. What does it mean to be virtuous in this moment? Brave? Compassionate? Rational? You're not a hero. You're a parent holding your hand over the face of someone who trusted you completely. There is no virtue here. Only survival. Or not. Some people say the dilemma is unrealistic, that no parent would ever do it, but history says otherwise. During the Rwandan genocide, in hiding places across Europe during the Holocaust, in villages in Vietnam, in forests during the Balkan Wars, people did this, or didn't, and they lived or died with that choice. So now, imagine the aftermath. You survived. The others survived. But the soldiers left. The war is over, and you're alive, holding a dead child. Did you do the right thing? What kind of answer would even help? This is what makes the smothered baby dilemma so uniquely cruel. It's not about outcomes. It's not about abstract rules. It's about being cornered in a moment where every option makes you a monster. And the worst part isn't the moral ambiguity. It's that you'll still have to live with yourself afterward, even though you no longer know who that self is. High in the Andes Mountains, in October 1972, a plane carrying a Uruguayan rugby team crashed into a glacier. The survivors waited for rescue. Days passed, then weeks. Search efforts failed. The food ran out. Snow fell. They were freezing, starving, surrounded by corpses, their friends, their family, their teammates, preserved in ice. And then someone said what everyone else was already thinking. We have to eat the bodies. This isn't fiction. This isn't a thought experiment. This happened. 16 people survived for 72 days by consuming the flesh of the dead. They carved muscle from the frozen bodies, dried strips of skin in the sun, scraped bone for marrow. Some of them never forgave themselves. Others said they would do it again without hesitation. This is the cabin cannibalism dilemma, not invented in a philosophy class, but lived in snowstorms, inside wreckage with the stench of death in the air. It forces us to confront not just what we're capable of, but what morality even means when civilization is gone. Let's begin with the basic question. Is it wrong to eat a dead person if it's the only way to survive? From a utilitarian perspective, the answer is simple. Morality is about consequences. One person is already dead. You are alive. Their body, though once sacred, is now nourishment, a means to preserve consciousness, language, thought, memory. No one is harmed because there's no one left in the body to harm. Jeremy Bentham might ask, does the pain you'll experience in guilt outweigh the life you save in your stomach? But even this logic is fragile, because we are not animals, scavenging carrion. We are human beings. And human beings carry with them a symbolic universe in which the body is not just flesh, but identity. To consume someone is to break a boundary far older than law. It's a taboo carved deep into our cultural DNA, present in every civilization. The dead must be honored, not harvested. Philosopher Immanuel Kant would reject the utilitarian argument entirely. He would argue that even a corpse has dignity, that to eat it, even in desperation, is to reduce a person to an object, a means to your end. And the moment you do that, you don't just lose your innocence, you lose your respect for the human condition. You become the sort of being that sees value only in utility. Now, take it a step further. What if they weren't dead yet? What if someone passed out from cold and hunger, and you started early? Just a little, just the leg. A clean cut. They probably wouldn't survive anyway. This is where the moral calculus crumbles. Now you are not just surviving, you are selecting, making judgments about the value of life, the likelihood of death, and your right to act before fate does. This is moral triage in its rawest form. And once you cross that line, how do you ever return? The survivors of the Andes crash only ate the dead, but the line between necessity and choice blurred over time. In interviews years later, some admitted they felt nothing after the first few bites. The taboo collapsed. Hunger became stronger than horror. And that reveals something terrifying. We often imagine morality as fixed, a set of principles that guide us no matter what. But crisis reveals what those principles are made of. When stripped of society, ritual, consequence, when survival is the only goal, what remains? Do you still see a human body as sacred? Or does it become meat? Jean-Paul Sartre would say that in radical freedom, you are entirely responsible for your choices, and that includes choosing who you are in situations with no rules. There is no divine law, no cosmic justice, just you. The storm, the body, the knife, and the meaning you assign to it, because that's what this dilemma ultimately asks. Who are you when no one is watching? You might say, well, I would never do that. But that's what most people said before they starved. And if you're thinking, but it's different, they had no choice. Remember this. Morality isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested when you think you have no choice at all. You're walking through a grocery store, bright lights, clean floors, soft music. You reach for a neatly packaged tray of meat, vacuum-sealed, perfectly sliced, labeled with a smiling cartoon pig. It costs less than your morning coffee. You toss it into your cart without thinking. The entire process, from the animal's birth to its death, has been designed to be invisible to you. No sounds, no smells, no blood, just clean packaging, market efficiency, a perfect system that keeps suffering out of sight. But what if the system depends on you not looking? Factory farming is one of the most ethically disturbing institutions in the modern world, not because it's hidden, but because it's hidden in plain sight. The suffering is real, documented, filmed, investigated. But most people don't care, or worse, they care, briefly, and then continue on as if they don't. This is a different kind of ethical dilemma. You're not being asked to pull a lever or torture a terrorist. You're being asked to notice, to stop pretending. and then to deal with the consequences of seeing what you've enabled. Every year, over 70 billion land animals are killed for food. Most of them, pigs, chickens, cows, live in industrialized confinement, crammed into windowless buildings, unable to move, mutilated without an aesthetic, separated from their young. Their lives are engineered for maximum output at minimum cost. But the real question isn't about whether that's bad. The real question is, if you know it's bad, but you still support it, who are you becoming? Let's go deeper. Philosopher Peter Singer argues that our moral circle should extend to all sentient beings, not just humans. If an animal can feel pain, fear, stress, if it can suffer, then that suffering matters. It's not about whether they speak our language or understand our laws. It's about whether they have a subjective experience of harm. And they do. But here's the twist. Singer doesn't say you're a monster for eating meat. He says you're a participant. And once you recognize that, you're forced to face a moral burden, not from violence you commit directly, but from violence you support passively. You're not the one slitting the throat. You're just paying someone else to do it, far away, behind doors you never open. That's where the true horror lies. Because once you open that door, you can't pretend you didn't. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called this kind of self-deception bad faith, lying to yourself, choosing comfort over truth, pretending you had no choice when you did. You knew, you just didn't want to change. And now you're stuck with the knowledge. Some try to justify it by invoking nature. Animals eat other animals, so why shouldn't we? But this isn't nature. Lions don't breed zebras in cages and inject them with growth hormones. They don't engineer suffering at scale. What we've built is a mechanized ecosystem of pain, optimized for your convenience. Others appeal to tradition. Meat is cultural. It's family. It's identity. And that's true, but tradition is not immune to moral scrutiny. Slavery was traditional. So was child labor. The fact that something has always been done doesn't mean it should continue. Then comes the fallback. I'm just one person. My choices don't matter. But this isn't about saving the world. It's about whether your integrity can survive your own values. Because if you believe suffering is wrong, but you participate in it anyway, how many other areas of your life follow that same formula? The most disturbing thing about this dilemma isn't that billions of animals are suffering. It's that billions of people are okay with that. As long as the grocery store stays clean, the music stays soft, and the packaging keeps smiling. And so the curtain stays closed. Because it's not just the animals who are trapped in the system. It's you. A man is on trial for murder. The evidence is clear. Security footage, witnesses, DNA. There's no doubt he was at the scene. There's no doubt the weapon was in his hand. But there's one problem. He says he didn't do it. Not in denial. In diagnosis. He claims he has dissociative identity disorder. That another personality, one of many, committed the crime while he was unaware. He weeps on the stand. He begs for help, not acquittal. His lawyer calls expert witnesses. And now the court must answer a question it's never been prepared to face. Which personality stands trial? This is the split personality trial dilemma, the challenge of assigning moral and legal responsibility when a single body contains multiple distinct selves. Selves with their own memories, voices, preferences, and often conflicting values. The law assumes unity of personhood. That behind every face is one moral agent, one continuous will. But in cases of dissociative identity disorder, DID, that unity breaks. You can have one person who says, I didn't do it, and another who says, I did, and I wanted to. Philosopher John Locke tied personal identity to psychological continuity, particularly memory. If you remember doing something, you're the same person who did it. But what happens when the body remembers and the mind does not? Suppose the host personality has no memory of the crime. Does that mean they're innocent, even though the same hands, the same body carried out the act? Or suppose one of the alternate personalities is deeply remorseful while the rest remain unaware. Do we punish the one who regrets it? Do we lock up all of them for the actions of one? This is not theoretical. There have been real cases, State v. Milligan in the United States, among others, where defendants with DID were put on trial and judges were forced to determine whether they were mentally competent, morally culpable, or just tragically fractured. One legal approach is to deny the multiplicity entirely, to say whatever you believe, you are one person in the eyes of the law. The crime was committed by your body, and that body will be punished. But this collapses the difference between physical control and moral agency. If a person can have multiple selves, each with its own memories and motives, then punishing the whole person becomes ethically fraught. You're punishing a set of identities who had no awareness, no choice, and no participation in the act. That's not justice. That's collective punishment against one person. Now consider the opposite view, that only the personality who committed the crime should be punished. That's more precise. But what does punishment mean in that case? Do you isolate that identity, try to delete it, imprison the body while the others, including innocent ones, suffer the sentence? It quickly becomes clear. Our legal and moral frameworks are built on a model of the mind that assumes singularity, and DID exposes the limits of that model. Philosopher Thomas Nagel once asked what it would be like to be a bat, to inhabit a mind structured entirely differently than our own. DID poses that question internally. What if there are many minds within one skull, many subjective centers, all unaware of each other, yet all tied to the same consequences? Now take it further. What if one of the alters is a child, innocent, scared, harmless? What if another is violent, impulsive, and cunning? What if the host self agrees to treatment, but one alter refuses? Who makes decisions about legal responsibility, medical care, therapy? Who has the right to speak? The philosopher Derek Parfit argued that identity is not what matters, that what we care about is psychological connectedness. But DID dissolves even that. These selves often do not share memories, values, or awareness. They are not fragments. They are alternatives. So what do you punish? Who do you protect? When a body contains many minds but the system insists on seeing only one, justice turns into reduction. The complexity is flattened. The court wants a defendant, not a constellation. And in trying to assign guilt to a singular identity, we may end up destroying all of them. Your child dies. Sudden, violent, no warning. A car crash, a brain hemorrhage, a rare infection the doctors missed. One moment you're holding them, the next you're not. But there's a man in a white coat who tells you something that should sound impossible. He can bring your child back. He has their DNA. He has the process ready. Within 9 months, he can hand you a genetically identical baby. The same hair, same eyes, same laugh. You can name them the same name. Dress them in the same clothes. Watch them grow up again. No tricks, no mystical resurrection. Just cloning and the erasure of absence. Would you say yes? On the surface, it feels like a gift, another chance, a way out of grief. But something deeper is being disturbed here, not biologically, but morally. Because the moment you say yes, you've made a decision that goes far beyond parenting. You've chosen to manufacture a person not for their own sake, but to replace someone else. This is what philosopher David Vellman warns about when he talks about narrative identity. To be a person isn't just to exist, it's to be treated as an end in yourself. Not a copy, not a substitute, but a story unfolding from its own center. Identity is not a formula. It's a trajectory. A person is not simply a genome, they are a being with potential for self-definition. The moment you create someone whose purpose is pre-assigned to echo a lost voice, to inhabit a vacant room, you've taken away their authorship. When you clone your child, you're not creating a new person. You're commissioning a replica in hopes that it will heal your pain. You're not choosing them. You're choosing what they represent. And that's the ethical fracture. Because what happens when the new child isn't the same? When they like different toys? Hate the foods the first one loved? Laugh at different jokes? What happens when the illusion breaks? Would you love them for who they are? Or punish them for who they're not? This is where Kantian ethics delivers its most severe judgment. Immanuel Kant argued that to treat another rational being as a mere means, even for something as sacred as parental grief, is to violate their dignity. To instrumentalize a life is to deny its freedom. And what is a clone, if not a life created to serve an emotional function? The cloned child becomes a tool, a living prosthetic for something lost. And what's worse, you may not even notice you're doing it. You'll tell yourself it's love, that you're giving them life, that none of this matters, because they're happy and safe. But deep down, your ethical compass has already tilted. Because you didn't choose life, you chose familiarity. You chose repetition. You chose the illusion that nothing ever really ends. Now imagine this child at 15. They learn the truth, that they're not just your child, they're a replacement, a second attempt, a walking monument to someone else's death. What happens to their sense of self? Do they rebel, collapse, beg to be recognized as real? Or worse, do they try to become the original? Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with a fixed identity, but must define ourselves. But a cloned child doesn't get to start from zero. Their essence was assigned before they ever breathed. They weren't born blank, they were born to match. And now their freedom becomes a kind of prison. The more they try to be themselves, the further they drift from the reason they were created. The more they succeed in becoming their own person, the more they fail to fulfill their purpose. This isn't just psychologically cruel, it's existential sabotage. And yet, the temptation is real, because cloning technology is becoming real, and grief doesn't wait for ethics to catch up. The desire to undo loss is universal, it's ancient. It lives in every religion, every myth, every parent who ever said, "I'd do anything to bring them back." But what if anything is the wrong answer? What if the very act of saying yes to the clone is the moment you cross an invisible moral line, the point where love becomes possession and healing becomes harm? What if, by trying to escape death, you destroy life? The smart pig. Would you eat a pig? The pig can talk, not fluently, but it knows words. It recognizes itself in mirrors. It solves puzzles faster than most toddlers. It plays memory games. It understands betrayal. It has an IQ that's higher than the average adult. It doesn't squeal. It pleads. And yet, it's still legal to kill it. Still legal to eat it. You're sitting at a restaurant. The waiter hands you a menu. One item catches your eye. Heritage pig, slow roasted, humanely raised, average cognitive score. What do? This isn't science fiction, not anymore. Pigs already outperform dogs in cognitive tests. They experience loneliness, jealousy, and affection. They grieve. Some scientists argue they're smarter than 3-year-old children, but they don't look like us. So we eat them. Now raise the stakes. Suppose this pig scores higher on an IQ test than you. Suppose it writes poetry. Suppose it remembers your name. It looks you in the eye. It knows what death is. It says, "Please don't." Do you still believe meat is dinner, or does it become murder? This is where everything begins to unravel. We claim that intelligence justifies moral worth. That animals don't deserve rights because they're not rational agents. They can't vote. They don't write books. They can't reflect on the meaning of life. But this one, so now what? Jeremy Bentham warned about this centuries ago. The question, he said, is not can they reason, nor can they speak, but can they suffer? And the pig, smart or not, suffers when you cut its throat. Intelligence doesn't change that. But if we're honest, suffering doesn't change much either. Because we already know they suffer. We've seen the footage. We just don't watch it a second time. So maybe it's not about pain. Maybe it's about kinship. The smart pig disturbs us not because it hurts, but because it feels too close. It bridges the gap between them and us. It shatters the protective illusion that animals are just appetites with fur. This one has a mind. And that's where the real moral horror begins. Because once you grant that mind moral status, once you admit that this pig counts, you're forced to confront a question. Why didn't they all count? Why was it okay to eat the ones who couldn't speak? Why did you care more when the pig looked you in the eye? And then the defense mechanisms begin. This is just one pig. What if it's genetically modified? What about tradition? What about humans who have low IQs? Do they deserve less protection? But that last question is exactly the point. If you wouldn't kill a human child with a low IQ for food, why is intelligence ever part of the equation? Immanuel Kant argued that humans have intrinsic worth because they're capable of moral law, of treating others as ends. But if that's your standard, then what about this pig? If it understands fairness, remembers kindness, recognizes betrayal, then killing it isn't just killing. It's domination. Now picture the slaughterhouse. This pig screams for its life. Not instinctively, but because it knows what's happening. It watched others die. It begged. It tried to escape. And someone slit its throat anyway. And tonight, it's on a plate, roasted, garnished. A being smarter than your neighbor turned into food because it was born with hooves. And the final horror? You'd still eat it. Maybe not proudly, maybe with a little hesitation. But if it tastes good and no one's looking and you're hungry, you'll lift the fork, you'll swallow the mind, and you'll call it dinner. Predictive policing. You're at home. It's 6. The door bursts open. Police flood the room. You're pulled out of bed, restrained, arrested. You're confused. You haven't done anything. You haven't broken a law. You haven't even made a mistake. But a system has flagged you. Your online activity, your location history, the people you messaged, the videos you paused on, the books you downloaded, the routes you walked at night. The pattern, whatever it is, matches known profile. According to the algorithm, there's a 92% chance you will commit a violent crime within the next 4. So they stopped you now. Welcome to predictive policing, the idea that crime can be prevented not by watching what people do, but by anticipating what they will do. Not through surveillance alone, but through probabilistic modeling. Not based on who you are, but who you're similar to. And this isn't science fiction. This is real. Versions of it are already in use. Some systems assign scores to individuals, some flag neighborhoods, some redirect patrols, some trigger interventions. But the core logic is the same. We don't wait for harm anymore. We calculate it. Then we act. Philosophically, this upends everything. Because for centuries, moral responsibility has been tied to choice. You're only accountable for actions you actually commit. That's the basis of every legal and ethical system we've built. Intention matters. Free will matters. Causality matters. Predictive policing shatters that. Now you're responsible not for what you did, but for what a machine thinks you will do. The utilitarian might defend it. If preventing harm is the highest goal, then stopping crime before it happens is efficient. If the data is accurate and the outcome is fewer victims, fewer deaths, fewer ruined lives, then the means may be justified. But let's be honest, predictive models are not neutral. They are trained on past data, and past data is polluted. Over-policing in poor neighborhoods, racial bias, under-reporting of certain crimes, sentencing disparities. So the algorithm doesn't predict crime, it reproduces patterns of power. If black neighborhoods have more arrests, the model predicts more crime there. If poor communities are more surveilled, the model detects more risk there. It's a feedback loop. And now the moral cost of this technology isn't just hypothetical, it's real. People are detained, watched, restricted, not for who they are, but for the statistical ghost of someone they resemble. This is predictive guilt, a concept with no room for innocence. And here's where Kantian ethics delivers the sharpest criticism. For Kant, moral law requires that people be treated as rational agents. Ends in themselves, that means they must be judged only for choices they make freely, not for outcomes that haven't occurred. Predictive policing obliterates this. It strips you of agency. It reduces you to risk. It replaces moral personhood with a probability score. Now imagine the consequences. You lose your job. Your name is entered in a quiet registry. You're flagged for travel. Your housing application is denied. Your digital record is tainted, not because of anything you did, but because of something you almost did in a world that never happened. And the irony? You might never have done it. But now, after the arrest, after the alienation, after the slow erosion of trust, you feel yourself hardening. You feel the walls go up. You feel resentment, anger, isolation. In trying to stop the crime, the system created the criminal. This is the final ethical collapse of predictive policing. It punishes you before you fall, and then pushes you. It makes moral beings into statistical threats, and then blames them for becoming what it feared. And the most chilling part? It all feels reasonable. No blood, no violence, no villain, just a quiet decision made in the background with a number. You are no longer innocent until proven guilty. You are guilty until predicted safe. And the prediction never forgets. The veil of ignorance. You're offered godlike power. The ability to design an entirely new society, its laws, its structure, its rewards and punishments, its values. One condition: after you're finished, your memory will be erased, and you'll be reborn into the world you've built, at random. You could wake up rich, healthy, brilliant, or paralyzed, starving, forgotten. You have no idea what your race, class, body, family, intelligence, or social standing will be. You could be the ruler. You could be the inmate. What kind of world would you create? This is the veil of ignorance, proposed by political philosopher John Rawls, not as an ideal society, but as a moral filter, a thought experiment to force fairness by severing self-interest from decision-making. Because once you don't know where you'll land, suddenly you care about the bottom. You care about the sick, the outcast, the disabled. You care about fair trials, access to medicine, the chance to survive a bad draw in life's genetic lottery. You don't build the best world for people like you. You build the best world for anyone, because you could become anyone. But this isn't just a thought experiment. It's a trap, because it exposes something we rarely admit out loud. Most people would not accept the world they live in if they didn't already know their place in it. You think you're fair because you support equal rights, but would you trade lives with a migrant construction worker? A woman in a country where marital rape isn't a crime? A child born in a war zone with no citizenship? Would you accept the same systems, the same laws, the same economic games, if your role were decided after the rules were locked in? The veil of ignorance reveals that fairness is rarely the starting point. It's the alibi. Take modern tax systems. They're justified as rewards for productivity, innovation, effort, but under the veil, those justifications evaporate. Because now you might be born into poverty. Now your hard work might not matter. Now you might clean toilets for 50 years and still be invisible. Take criminal justice. You might believe harsh sentences deter crime until you imagine being born into a neighborhood over-policed, underfunded, treated like a containment zone. Now you might be the one falsely accused. Now you might be the one sitting in a cell because you couldn't afford bail. Take immigration. You might believe in strict borders until you imagine being born on the wrong side of them. The veil burns away every moral illusion. It doesn't ask what kind of world you want. It asks what kind of world you'd accept if you couldn't cheat the draw. And what it reveals is disturbing. People don't want fairness. They want security from being the one crushed. Philosopher T.M. Scanlon described morality not as divine command or social utility, but as what no one could reasonably reject. The veil of ignorance exposes how easily people build systems that only the privileged could ever accept. The rest, they're told to work harder, to wait their turn, to stop complaining. Now imagine if world leaders were forced under the veil. No one governs until they've built a system they'd accept from any position. Blind, poor, disabled, undocumented. What would survive? Would you still allow healthcare to be sold? Would you still allow public education to rot by zip code? Would you still allow billionaires to shape politics? The answer is obvious, which is why no one governs that way. Here's the final twist. We already live behind the veil. You didn't choose your race, your birthplace, your parents, your genes, your first language. Every life is a roll of cosmic dice. The difference is, you weren't asked to design the system first. You were thrown into it, and you've spent your life adapting to its rules, often believing they were fair just because they were already there. The veil of ignorance isn't just a tool for justice. It's a mirror, and most people look away because they know if they had to design the world before knowing their place in it, they would never have built this one. Paralyzed and coerced. You're awake. You can see. You can feel, but you can't move. A neural implant has hijacked your motor cortex. Your limbs are no longer under your control. You are being used, not metaphorically, but literally. You watch your hand pull a trigger. You feel your legs walk toward a target. You hear a scream, a fall, a death. You didn't want this. You couldn't stop it, but the body that committed the act was yours. This is the paralyzed and coerced dilemma, a philosophical nightmare in which you are made to commit violence while entirely stripped of agency. The question is simple and unbearable. Are you guilty? The legal system might say no. You had no intent, no voluntary motion. You were, in every meaningful way, a hostage in your own body. But morality isn't always that clean. You still feel the weight of the gun. You remember the moment. You remember the victim's face. Even though it wasn't you doing it, your brain still processed it. The guilt, even if irrational, stayed. But guilt isn't the only problem. Others don't see your brain. They see your body. This is where phenomenology becomes more than academic theory. Philosophers like Merleau-Ponty argued that our body is not just something we own, it's part of how we are in the world. It's how we're seen, judged, understood. When your body kills someone, no matter who was behind the controls, the world treats you as the killer. People stare. You lose your job. The family of the victim demands justice. They know you didn't choose to do it, but that doesn't erase their loss. Someone must be blamed, and the only available subject is you. And now, a deeper problem begins to emerge. What happens when responsibility and control diverge? We like to believe that moral accountability belongs to the one who chooses. But what if intent becomes irrelevant, and we start measuring people by consequence? This is not science fiction. Similar logic already exists. When autonomous machines cause injury, engineers debate who should be held accountable: the designer, the user, the machine itself. When someone with a mental disorder commits a crime, we weigh their control, but still often punish them. What about the person whose body was used as a weapon? Do they become a moral object? A defective shell? Do we treat them like we do malfunctioning hardware? Or worse, do we blame them because we need someone to blame? Philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about the banality of evil, how ordinary people become participants in terrible systems, not because of malice, but because they're swept along by processes they don't fully control. But in this dilemma, there is no complicity, only occupation. You weren't swept along. You were overridden, and yet the ethical damage remains. Not to others, to you. Because from now on, when you look at your hands, You don't see tools. You see weapons. You didn't choose the crime, but you remember the motion. You saw the blood. And no matter how many people tell you it wasn't your fault, part of you is certain. Someone died through you. Can you be forgiven for something you didn't do? Can you heal from something your mind never committed, but your body did? Now imagine this becomes widespread. Military technology, neurological hijacking, people rented as tools of war, their agency suspended, their bodies mobilized, cheap, deniable violence. No one pulls the trigger anymore. They just borrow someone else's finger. And when it's over, they walk free. And you stay behind, trying to convince the world and yourself that what they did wasn't really you. And maybe they'll believe you, but that won't stop you from waking up in the middle of the night, watching your own hands in the dark, and wondering whether they still belong to you at all. Factory farming, ignorance. You walk into a supermarket. It's bright, clean, climate-controlled. You pick up a plastic-wrapped package of chicken, boneless, skinless, pre-sliced. It costs less than your coffee. You don't think about it. You just place it in your cart. You have plans. You're busy. You're not cruel. You're hungry. But here's what that chicken cost. It lived in a windowless shed with 20,000 others, bred to grow so fast its legs collapsed under its own weight. Never saw daylight, never moved more than a few inches, covered in ammonia burns from its own waste, caught by its wings, slammed into crates, stunned, throats slit, many fully conscious when it happened. And you paid for that. This is the factory farming ignorance dilemma. The quiet daily decision to buy cheap meat, knowing that suffering occurred and choosing not to care. You didn't kill the animal. You didn't run the farm, but you paid someone who did. In most moral frameworks, ignorance can lessen guilt. If you didn't know, you couldn't have acted differently. But what if the ignorance is chosen? What if you know or suspect, but look away? Philosopher Peter Singer calls this culpable ignorance. The kind of not knowing that exists in a world full of information. You could have learned, you just didn't want to. And in that case, your ignorance isn't an excuse. It's a strategy, and the system counts on it. The suffering is hidden behind words like natural, cage-free, humane, words that mean almost nothing legally. They are designed to confuse, to comfort, to separate the product from the process. Because if you had to watch the process, if you had to kill the animal yourself, you might eat differently, but you don't. Because you've been given a choice, convenience or conscience. And every day, convenience wins. Even philosophers wrestle with this. Derek Parfit argued that moral harm can be diffused across many people. If you buy one package of chicken, you don't kill one chicken. Your contribution is so small, it feels meaningless. But this is where complicity matters. You may not cause the harm, but you participate in the system that does. You create the demand. You sustain the supply. In economic terms, you're part of the feedback loop. In moral terms, you're part of the crime. Now let's confront the most common defense. I like meat, pleasure, tradition, cultural habits. These are real and not trivial. They define family gatherings, holiday meals, identity. And yet, this is where moral philosophy becomes most brutal. Pleasure doesn't justify suffering. If it did, we could harm anyone, as long as we enjoyed it. We don't accept that logic with people. We shouldn't accept it with animals. Immanuel Kant argued that our duty to animals isn't because they have rights, but because cruelty corrupts the human soul. If you tolerate suffering in your daily habits, even if indirect, you begin to erode your own moral framework. And that's the real cost of factory farming. Not just the animals, but what it teaches you about suffering, that it can be ignored, that it can be packaged, that it can be someone else's problem as long as the product is cheap and tasty. Now imagine the future. Decades from now, children may look back on factory farming the way we now look at slavery or child labor or public executions. They'll ask how we allowed such cruelty for so long. And the answer will be this: because it was easy, because the animals couldn't speak, because their pain was silent and our hunger was loud. You don't have to go vegan overnight. That's not the point. The point is, every time you eat, you decide something about the world, about which lives matter, about what kind of suffering is acceptable, as long as you don't have to see it. And the most disturbing part, you already know. You just keep pretending you don't. Who do you throw overboard? You're on a lifeboat. The ship has sunk. Dozens are dead. You and a small group of survivors have clambered onto a rescue raft. It's leaking. It's overloaded. The weight is too much. If nothing changes, everyone on board will drown. There's no rescue in sight. No land. No radio. Just water and panic. Someone does the math. This boat was made for 10. There are 16 of you. It's decided 6 people have to go overboard. But no one volunteers. So someone stands up and says the words you were afraid would come. We have to choose. This is the Lifeboat Dilemma, a brutal scenario that strips ethics down to its most primitive form, survival versus principle. And what makes it so disturbing is not just the idea that some people must die, but that you must decide who. Let's talk philosophy. In a utilitarian framework, this is a classic triage problem. The goal is to maximize survival. Maybe you throw overboard the weakest swimmers, the oldest, the most injured. Maybe someone argues that a young parent should stay while a loner should go. Each body is measured not by its dignity, but by its utility to the outcome. But utilitarianism has a terrible blind spot. It requires someone to do the calculations. It demands that you reduce humans to variables. It says, if 6 people must die, let them be the 6 who will be least missed, or do the least good, or cost the most resources to save. That's not ethics. That's moral accounting. And the price is your soul. Now, let's bring in deontological ethics, the philosophy of duty and moral rules. This approach, rooted in Kant's work, would reject the idea of calculating it all. Every person has intrinsic worth. You cannot sacrifice some for the benefit of others. There is no equation that justifies murder. So what would a Kantian do on the lifeboat? Nothing? Let everyone drown? Maybe. Or maybe they would argue that choosing who dies is worse than all dying as equals. Because the moment you start assigning value to human life, you're not saving humanity. You're dismantling it. But here's where the dilemma twists even deeper. Because someone on the boat always asks, shouldn't we vote? And suddenly, democracy enters the lifeboat. People are being selected. Maybe an old man gets more votes than a child. Maybe someone's profession is discussed. A surgeon might be more valuable than a teacher. Maybe race, gender, status, or language sneak in. Subtly, silently. And now, ethics becomes politics. Life becomes a popularity contest. The moral collapse is disguised as fairness. Then someone says, let's draw straws. Randomness. The great equalizer. Everyone has the same chance. No judgment. No bias. But now chance has replaced choice. You've traded morality for math and called it justice. And maybe the most terrifying thing is this. Even if you survive, even if you're one of the 10 who stays on the boat, you'll never forget what you did. Or worse, you'll get used to it. You'll learn that in moments of crisis, principles can be suspended. That when life gets hard enough, ethics becomes negotiable. And once you learn that, it never fully leaves you. This is why philosopher Garrett Hardin warned against the lifeboat metaphor in global ethics. He argued that if rich nations act like lifeboats, allowing too many in, offering too much help, they risk sinking everyone. Harsh, utilitarian logic. But others like Peter Singer argue the opposite. If we have the means to help, we're morally obligated to do so, even if it means risk, even if it means sacrifice. So the real question isn't just who you throw overboard. It's what kind of person you become by deciding that question. Because once you learn to measure life in weight, in usefulness, in vote count, you may not be able to see people the same way again. Public shaming. You scroll past the video. A man screaming at a barista. A woman calling the police on a neighbor for no reason. A teenager caught vandalizing a memorial. All of them exposed. Names revealed. Addresses posted. Thousands of comments. Find her job. He deserves to suffer. This is justice. And you join in. You share the video. You add a comment. Just one more voice in a chorus of moral outrage. Then you move on. But for the person in the video, the punishment doesn't end. Their employer fires them. Their landlord evicts them. Their family cuts ties. No due process. No trial. Just the internet's judgment. Absolute and permanent. This is the public shaming dilemma, the ethical crisis of whether destroying someone's reputation online is a form of justice or simply a modern form of mob violence. The argument in favor is clear. They deserved it. They said something racist. They assaulted someone. They hurt others and got away with it until someone hit record. The justice system often fails. The rich evade consequences. The powerful protect their own. But the internet doesn't care who you are. It delivers punishment instantly, democratically. It feels fair. Philosopher Jeremy Bentham once proposed the idea of the panopticon, a prison where every inmate can be watched at all times. He believed visibility would enforce morality. People behave when they know they're being seen. That logic now applies to everyone. Every phone is a panopticon, and public shaming becomes enforcement. But what are we enforcing? Is it justice or is it outrage? A single moment, filmed out of context, becomes the totality of a person, their past erased, their future denied. They are not tried, they are framed. In one sentence, one headline, one caption, and now they are not a person anymore. They are content. Philosopher Michel Foucault wrote that punishment once involved bodies, whips, executions, chains, but modern power operates through reputation. When the state wanted to control someone, it marked them criminal, deviant, untrustworthy. Today we do that ourselves. A hashtag is enough. And unlike a sentence in prison, online shame never ends. The internet doesn't forget. It archives. Search engines turn a single mistake into a permanent identity. 10 years later, a job interview ends because of something you said at night, and there is no appeal. But suppose the person really did something wrong. Suppose it wasn't minor. They hurt someone. They laughed about it. They never apologized. Shouldn't they be held accountable? Yes. But by who? Justice is supposed to be dispassionate. It requires context, evidence, proportionality. But online, justice is emotional, viral, scaled by views, not facts. One person may be forgiven, another destroyed, depending on how the clip is edited. This is why Kantian ethics matters here. Immanuel Kant warned that we must treat people not as means to an end, not even the end of our moral satisfaction. If we expose someone just to feel virtuous, to perform our own goodness, then we've reduced them to a moral prop. We didn't act for justice. We acted to feel like the good guys. And there's another problem. We like to believe public shaming targets the powerful, but often it doesn't. It lands hardest on those without protection. Retail workers, kids, ordinary people who don't have lawyers or PR teams. Executives vanish. Interns get destroyed. This is why philosopher Hannah Arendt warned that mob justice often becomes moral theater, a way for society to reassert its values, not by enforcing them fairly, but by finding someone to punish loudly. It's not about correction. It's about sacrifice. And once you've sacrificed someone, the ritual demands you look away. We never follow up, never ask whether the person changed, whether they apologized, whether they were even guilty. The punishment is permanent, but the outrage is temporary. It feels like justice, but it functions like revenge. A decentralized, performative, unaccountable system of punishment that doesn't believe in reform, only exile. And in the end, the question isn't, did they deserve it? The question is, what kind of world do we create when every mistake is permanent and every bystander becomes an executioner? A world where morality is policed by visibility and the sentence is life without reputation. Euthanasia by request. Patient begs for death. A man is dying. The pain is constant, neurological, unrelenting, beyond morphine. His organs are failing. Every day is a negotiation between agony and sedation. He is conscious, rational, fully aware, and he wants it to end. He asks to die, not passively, not slowly. He wants help, a physician, a drug, a controlled and painless exit. He signs the forms. He confirms again and again that this is not despair, not confusion, just certainty. But the law says no, not here, not yet, not allowed. And so he waits, in pain, until his body breaks before his will does. This is the euthanasia by request dilemma, the question of whether a person in full possession of their mind has the right to end their own life and whether anyone else has the right to help. Some call it mercy, others call it murder. It depends on how you define autonomy. The standard argument for assisted dying begins with self-ownership. Your body, your life, your end. If the state cannot compel you to live a certain way, how can it compel you to continue living when you no longer want to? To deny euthanasia is to declare that your life belongs to someone else, a government, a law, a religion, or a system that believes it knows better than you when you've had enough. And yet, we hesitate. Why? Because life is not just a private good. It's a social value. Doctors are trained to preserve it. Families are wired to protect it. Philosophies, especially those rooted in religious or deontological ethics, often treat life as sacred, not just important. In that framework, it doesn't matter how much pain you're in. You don't own your life. You're merely responsible for it. You're a steward, not a sovereign. But what if that belief condemns people to pointless suffering? There's a difference between a tragic death and a prolonged one, between dying and being denied death. The right to die isn't about rejecting life. It's about rejecting torture disguised as care. Opponents often argue that permitting euthanasia creates a slippery slope, that allowing death in extreme cases will lead to pressure, coercion, or casual killing of the vulnerable. But this only holds if we assume people don't know their own will. If someone is terminal, conscious, and consistent, what more do we need? There's also the claim that pain can be managed, that no one needs suffer that much. But this simply isn't true. Palliative care can do a lot, but not everything. Pain, nausea, humiliation, loss of identity, these can remain. Sometimes the only thing medicine preserves is the ability to watch yourself deteriorate. And here's the coldest part. We give this choice to animals. We euthanize dogs, cats, horses when their suffering becomes too much. We say it's the humane thing, the kind thing. But when a person asks for the same, we tell them to be brave. We call it suicide. We force them to suffer for the sake of principle. It's only when the suffering is unimaginable that people change their minds. And by then, it's too late. Euthanasia isn't about death. It's about control. Control over when enough is enough. Control over whether the last chapter of your life is defined by you or by policies written by people who've never been in your bed, never worn your pain. We treat autonomy as a moral right until someone uses it to choose non-existence. And suddenly, we decide their choice doesn't count. But if your right to life means anything, it must include the right to end it when it becomes a prison. Otherwise, you're not being protected. You're being detained. The man in the chair. A bomb is hidden in a crowded city. It will explode in less than an hour. Hundreds, maybe thousands will die. You've caught the man who planted it. He's sitting in front of you. Calm, silent. He won't say where it is. You know he knows. He doesn't care about the people. He's not afraid of death. And he's not talking. There's only one question left. Would you torture him to save them? This is the ticking time bomb scenario, a modern classic in ethical thought experiments. But unlike the trolley problem, this one gets darker the longer you stare at it. Let's assume torture works, just for the sake of argument. Let's say if you inflict enough pain, he'll talk, he'll give up the location. You can save lives. Right here, right now. Are you morally obligated to hurt him? If you say yes, you're siding with consequentialism. The idea that actions are right or wrong depending on their outcomes. You hurt one to save many. It's ugly, yes, but ethical under pressure. Jeremy Bentham believed if pain leads to less overall suffering, then pain is justified. Morality, in that view, is a numbers game. But then someone asks, where do you draw the line? What if he doesn't break after 5 minutes? 10? Do you go further? Pull fingernails? Break bones? Threaten his family? What if you torture the wrong man? Suddenly, the clean logic of outcomes begins to rot. Philosopher Michael Sandel once pointed out, ethics based solely on results don't account for what it does to the person doing the act. It's not just about the victim, it's about you. You become the hand that breaks people, the face of pain. You save the city. But what have you made yourself into? Kantian ethics, again, draws a hard line. No person should ever be treated as a mere tool, no matter the consequence. Torturing someone, even a guilty person, reduces him to a machine, a pain-responsive object used to get data. And when we justify that, we risk justifying anything. You may think this is just a thought experiment. Real life is more complicated, but that's the point. Real life is exactly this complicated. Guantanamo Bay, CIA black sites. Intelligence agencies have built entire architectures around this question. Some have argued that torture is just another tool like wiretapping or drone surveillance. Others insist it breaks the moral spine of any society that allows it. There's also the problem of certainty. How do you know he's guilty? If you're wrong, you've not only tortured an innocent man, you've handed tyranny a moral permission slip. It was justified. We thought it would help. The history of torture is full of confessions that meant nothing. Men saying anything to make the pain stop. So even if you believe it's justified, you still can't trust the result. You're gambling with ethics. And with a human body, some argue for a torture warrant, legal permission in extreme emergencies, with oversight. But as legal scholar Alan Dershowitz noted, the moment you institutionalize torture, even a little, you normalize it. It goes from unthinkable to procedural. Now imagine the moment after the bomb is found. The city is saved. People cheer. But you walk away with blood on your hands, and maybe it worked. Maybe the pain you inflicted saved lives. But what if it didn't? What if he talked, and it was a lie? What if the bomb was never real? You tortured someone to stop a fantasy, and now it's too late to unmake the monster you've become. That's the horror of this dilemma. It doesn't just question ethics, it questions your confidence in your own certainty. Because if you ever get this wrong, even once, there's no ethical system in the world that can make that okay. AI self-driving car. You're crossing the street. The light is green. You have the right of way. You're halfway across the intersection when you hear it. Tires screeching, a sudden acceleration, a mechanical whine. You turn. A self-driving car is headed straight for you. Inside it is one passenger, the owner relaxed in the back seat, reading. The AI has seconds to respond. It can either swerve into a wall, killing the passenger, or stay its course and kill you. No time for debate, no chance for intervention. The car makes its choice, and you're dead. This is the self-driving car dilemma, or what some call the AI trolley problem. It forces us to confront what happens when machines start making moral decisions, not in theory, but on the road, in real time, with real bodies. Here's the problem. Every decision made in that split second must be pre-programmed. There's no human panic, no emotion, just code. So the real question becomes, whose life should the algorithm value more? You, the pedestrian, or the person who paid for the car? Philosophers have been debating versions of this for centuries, but now it's not hypothetical. Tesla, Waymo, and dozens of other companies are already testing these systems, and none of them can escape the central problem. When something goes wrong, the car must decide who dies. From a utilitarian perspective, the choice is simple. Pick the option with the least harm. Save more lives. Minimize suffering. If swerving into the wall kills one person and avoids hitting 5, then the sacrifice is justified. Classic moral math. But here's the catch. Who is programming that math? Car manufacturers? Insurance companies? Governments? Let's say the algorithm is designed to save the greatest number of lives. That sounds ethical. But now imagine you're in the back seat. You paid for the car, and you realize in a dangerous situation, it might decide you are the one to be sacrificed. Would you still buy it? This is where the ethics meets capitalism. What people want from a self-driving car is not moral purity, it's protection. If a company released a car that was guaranteed to kill its own passenger in certain scenarios, it would never sell. So what do the companies do? They make compromises. They add layers, probability curves, risk weighting. They try not to talk about it. But someone somewhere is still writing the line of code that says, in a life or death scenario, this person dies. And that's where the philosophy gets darker. Let's say you're an elderly pedestrian. The car can choose to hit you or swerve and hit a child. What should it do? Now try swapping the child with a criminal, or a politician, or someone rich, or someone disabled, or someone homeless. You begin to see the problem. The algorithm doesn't know what a life is worth, but someone told it what to value. This is where we enter the realm of algorithmic ethics, a field of philosophy and technology that studies what happens when machines are forced to act like moral agents. And the consensus is this: machines don't have values, people do. And when we embed those values into machines, we freeze our moral assumptions into code. And once it's coded, it's hidden. You won't see it when you order the car. It won't be in the brochure. But it's there, in every turn. Every decision, every accident, a silent, invisible moral framework guiding every outcome. Now imagine this. Your friend is killed by a self-driving car. The company apologizes. It shows you the simulation. Given the parameters, the car chose the least harmful outcome. But your friend is still dead. No driver, no intent, no one to punish, no one to forgive, just a decision. And you realize something chilling. You are no longer dying because of human error. You are dying because of design. The death was planned, anticipated, and acceptable within parameters. That's the real ethical horror. Not that a machine made a mistake, but that it did exactly what it was programmed to do. And the person who wrote that line of code, they never even looked you in the eye. Identity swap punishment. A man assaults another man in a back alley. It's brutal. The victim survives, but barely. Broken jaw, permanent hearing loss, recurring nightmares. The court is unconventional. This is the year 2048. The judge offers an alternative to prison. A neural exchange. They will swap minds between the criminal and the victim, literally transfer the consciousness, memories, and personality of each into the other's body. The victim will wake up in the body of the man who harmed him, and the criminal will wake up inside the body he disfigured. The goal isn't revenge, it's empathy. Make the perpetrator live with the pain he inflicted. Make the victim see what it's like to be the kind of person capable of violence. Both parties agree. The procedure is done, and then everything breaks. This is the identity swap punishment dilemma, the question of whether justice can be served not through imprisonment or rehabilitation, but by reversing subjective experience, a punishment so intimate it collapses the boundary between self and other. At first glance, the logic is familiar. It's a version of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Except here, we ensure that the doing happens to you. You don't just imagine their pain, you inhabit it. But what happens to justice when identity becomes transferable? The man now in the criminal's body, who still feels like himself, has to live with a face he hates, a reputation he didn't earn, and a physical shell that is suddenly vulnerable to the judgment of the public. People glare at him, spit at him, refuse to serve him food. He says, "I'm not him." No one believes him. The philosopher John Locke defined personal identity as memory continuity. If the memories are yours, then the self is yours. By Locke's standard, the self has moved. The victim is now in the criminal's body. The criminal is now in the victim's. But the legal system still treats the body as the bearer of accountability. So the question becomes, who serves the sentence? The person with the criminal's memories, now in a fragile, damaged body, claims to be changed. That the experience of inhabiting the suffering he caused has humbled him. He apologizes. He cries. He begs to return to his original body. But can we trust this? Is remorse genuine if it's extracted by force? Or is it just another survival strategy? Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned that punishment does not create morality, it creates obedience. And in this case, the swap doesn't just produce suffering, it creates confusion about who is actually suffering. The criminal now feels pain, but only because he's in a body that received it. His brain didn't grow compassion. It reacted to new inputs. So we must ask, does punishment that bypasses understanding create justice, or just another victim? Meanwhile, the victim, now trapped in the body of his assailant, starts to fracture. His friends don't recognize him. His family doesn't visit. He's banned from his own home. He sees news headlines calling him a monster. Eventually, he stops correcting people. He becomes what the world sees, and that is the final failure. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that hell is other people, not because people are evil, but because they fix us in their gaze. They define us from the outside. Identity becomes something you don't control. In this case, the swap makes that literal. The gaze doesn't follow the mind, it follows the skin. So even if the victim is innocent, he now carries the social consequences of guilt. This turns justice into something closer to theater. The goal wasn't repair or reform. It was demonstration, to make someone feel what they've done, regardless of whether it leads to moral growth. But moral philosophy warns us here. Kant insisted that people must always be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means. A punishment that uses a person's body as a stage for someone else's lesson violates that. Even if both parties consented, the moment identity becomes a spectacle, ethics unravels. Because suffering alone doesn't purify. It only destroys. What's left in the end are two displaced selves. One, broken in a body that will never be believed. The other, suffering in a way that teaches nothing. And the system that created them, so proud of its innovation, quietly admits what it won't say aloud. It no longer knows what a person is, only what it can move, trade, and reverse. The resume you never had a chance with. You apply for a job. You polish your resume. You research the company. You write a thoughtful cover letter. You triple-check everything. Then, silence. A few days later, you get a rejection. No interview, no explanation. Just a polite, automated message. We've moved forward with other candidates. What you don't know is that your resume was never read by a human. It was scanned by an algorithm. And it didn't like you. Not because of your experience. Not because of your skills. But because of the patterns. You went to the wrong school. You had a gap in your employment. You live in the wrong zip code. Your name, your actual name, was statistically linked to lower retention rates. This is algorithmic hiring, a system designed to process applications at scale, filter out bad fits, and predict who will perform well. The goal is efficiency, objectivity, optimization. But what happens when the machine inherits all the biases of the past and hides them in probability curves? Let's say the algorithm was trained on past successful employees. If most of them were white, male, Ivy League graduates, then the system learns that is what success looks like. It's not malicious. It's not sexist. It's worse. It's statistical. From a utilitarian standpoint, the company is doing what makes sense. Maximize output. Minimize cost. If the algorithm works, if it predicts who will stay longer, perform better, quit less, then the system is working. But utilitarianism always risks reducing people to metrics, numbers in a spreadsheet that forget they once had stories. Now consider virtue ethics, the philosophy that morality is about character, not just outcomes. In this view, what kind of person do you become when you allow a machine to make decisions about people without ever speaking to them? You become efficient, and you become cold. Now imagine the Kantian view. Every human must be treated as an end, not a means. An algorithm cannot do that. It doesn't see dignity, it doesn't see humanity, it sees features. And once you've accepted that system, once you start building the future based on the statistical shadows of the past, you are institutionalizing injustice with perfect neutrality. And no one is responsible. The HR manager says, "We let the software filter applicants." The software company says, "We just trained it on your data." The data says, "This is what worked before." And you, the person who got rejected, will never know if your crime was being poor, female, black, disabled, neurodivergent, or just slightly unscannable. Because algorithmic discrimination is not explicit. It's silent, mathematical, and terrifyingly legal. Philosopher Cathy O'Neil calls these systems weapons of math destruction, tools that appear fair but are structurally designed to reproduce inequality, because they operate at scale, because they operate in secrecy, and because they are trusted more than people. You can't argue with an algorithm. You can't appeal its decision. You can't ask it to see you. And that's the real philosophical horror. Not that the system is unfair, but that it pretends not to be. It gives the illusion of objectivity while quietly filtering the world through the same cracked lens we've always used. It tells you that you didn't get the job because you weren't good enough. But really, you didn't get the job because someone in 2012 who looked like you quit early. That's what progress looks like now. It's not a boot on your neck. It's an invisible line of code saying no. Conjoined twins. They share a heart. One functional heart, split across two bodies. They are conjoined from the chest down. Separate brains. Separate personalities. Separate pain. One wants to be split, even if it means her sibling dies. The other doesn't. Without surgery, both will die within 6 months. With surgery, one might live. The question isn't whether it's tragic. The question is whether it's ethical to kill one person against her will to save another who shares her body. This is the conjoined twin dilemma, a confrontation with the limits of personhood, consent, and bodily autonomy when those bodies are physically entangled. Start with what you know. There are two people, two sets of thoughts, two identities. Any decision must take both into account. No one gets to override the other. Except now one of them will die anyway. You can do nothing. Let nature end both lives. Or you intervene and decide who gets to live. Now every moral principle collapses into paradox. You can't kill an innocent person against their will. But what if not killing her means both die? You can't force someone to sacrifice their life. But what if refusing the sacrifice guarantees death for the one who doesn't want to die? Even autonomy, the gold standard of modern ethics, fails here, because neither twin has full control over her body. Every choice affects the other. One's freedom requires the other's death. No surgeon makes this decision lightly, but some have, in real cases. In 2000, British doctors went to court to separate conjoined twins named Mary and Jody. If left conjoined, both would die. If separated, Jody would survive. Mary would die immediately. The parents opposed the procedure. The court ruled in favor of separation. The operation was performed. Mary died on the table. Jody survived. The court's reasoning? Double effect. A moral principle borrowed from Catholic ethics. You're allowed to cause harm as a side effect of doing good, as long as the harm isn't your goal. But is it really an unintended consequence? When you predict it, plan for it, and it happens the moment you act. You didn't kill someone accidentally. You killed her to give the other one a chance. And here's the deeper fracture. If you choose not to act, both die. If you act, one dies by your hand. So what matters more? Guilt by action, or guilt by inaction? This is where Kant's framework explodes. You cannot treat a person merely as a means, even to save someone else. Killing one twin to save the other reduces her to a tool. Even if the outcome is survival, even if you believe it's mercy, you've still decided that her life is expendable. Now take it further. What if the one who wants to live is older, smarter, more likely to contribute to society? What if she begs the doctors to separate them? What if the other one says no? What if both are infants? At what point does medical decision become ethical calculus? This isn't theory. This is the real edge of ethics, where personhood is fused, where death is unavoidable, and where every choice leaves a body behind. You don't get to save both. You only get to decide who dies first, and whether your hands are on the knife. Refugee Lifeboat Dilemma. Imagine a lifeboat drifting in open water. It holds 30 people. You are one of them. There is food. There is space. It's not luxurious, but it's stable, floating, survivable. The sea is calm until the shouting begins. You hear them first. Then you see them in the distance, another group, dozens more. Soaked, desperate, clinging to pieces of wreckage, their faces hollowed by salt and panic. They are survivors too. Their boat has already sunk. They are drowning. They beg you to pull them in. And someone on your boat says, "If we let them in, we all sink." No one says anything after that. Because it sounds like reason. It sounds like survival. It sounds like the kind of sentence that doesn't need to be questioned. So you say nothing, and you let them drown. This is the lifeboat metaphor introduced by biologist and philosopher Garrett Hardin in the 1970s, not as a thought experiment, but as a real political proposal. According to Hardin, wealthy nations are lifeboats, the poor are in the water, and helping them through immigration, aid, or open borders is not compassion, it is suicide. It's the philosophy of moral triage. Treat the wounded who can be saved, leave the others to die. And it's not hypothetical. It's how immigration policy works. In Europe, in the US, in Australia. Patrol boats stop migrants before they reach shore. Detention centers overflow. Visa caps are enforced like pressure valves. Asylum requests are denied with sterile language. The system cannot accommodate further intake. National capacity is at its limit. We must protect social cohesion. The boat is full. But here's the problem. It usually isn't. Philosopher Peter Singer draws a different analogy. Suppose you walk past a shallow pond and see a child drowning. You could save them easily. No danger to you, just some wet clothes, some inconvenience. If you walk past and let them drown, you've committed a moral failure. Now replace the pond with the Mediterranean, the Rio Grande, the English Channel, and suddenly the child is invisible. The rescue is optional. The life is negotiable. Why? Because distance distorts ethics. Because when suffering is out of view, it becomes data. Because the further someone is from your language, your neighborhood, your sense of belonging, the less human they seem, and the easier it becomes to justify their death with a single sentence. We can't save everyone. Let's return to philosophy. Utilitarianism says, maximize well-being for the greatest number. It's tempting to use this lens. Close the borders to protect internal stability. Prioritize the group. Preserve the system. But this overlooks something. The calculation of worth. Who gets counted in your equation? The people inside the boat, the people in the water, or just the ones who look like you? Because if your math excludes the drowning, if their suffering doesn't matter in your calculus, then it's not utilitarianism, it's tribalism with numbers. Now consider Kantian ethics. Immanuel Kant argued that every person must be treated as an end in themselves, not as a tool, not as a risk factor, not as a variable in someone else's security strategy. In this view, turning people away to protect your comfort isn't just unkind. It's a categorical failure of moral duty. But the world doesn't operate on duty. It operates on fear. Fear that newcomers will disrupt the economy. Fear that culture will change. That crime will rise. That we will lose control. And so entire governments have learned to speak in lifeboat language, calmly, legally, rationally, while people disappear beneath the waves. And when bodies wash ashore, the question becomes administrative. Were they processed? Did they file correctly? Were they on the list? As if bureaucracy can make drowning ethical. This has happened before. In 1939, a ship called the SS St. Louis carried over 900 Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany. It sailed to the United States. It was denied. It sailed to Canada. Denied again. It returned to Europe. A quarter of the passengers were later murdered in the Holocaust. Why didn't they let them in? Because the boat was full. That phrase, so simple, so reasonable, has become the moral sedative of the modern world. It puts the burden of death on logistics. It makes cruelty sound like prudence. It tells you that letting people drown is not only acceptable, but necessary. But here's the disturbing truth. There is no fixed limit. There is no number at which compassion breaks. There is only the line you're willing to draw and live with. So the real question is not whether the boat is full. The real question is, how many people are you willing to let die so that you can sit a little more comfortably? And how many will it take before you stop pretending it's not your hand pulling the ladder up? The classic trolley problem. You're standing beside a railway track. In the distance, a trolley speeds out of control. On the main track ahead, 5 workers are tied down and unable to move. They will die if the trolley continues on its current path. But next to you is a lever. If you pull it, the trolley diverts to a side track where 1 person is tied down. Pull the lever, and you save 5 lives, but you kill 1. Do nothing, and 5 die, but you didn't intervene. This is the trolley problem, a thought experiment so deceptively simple that it has fractured moral philosophy for over half a century. It was first introduced by philosopher Philippa Foot in 1967 and later expanded by Judith Jarvis Thomson. But the real reason it spread like wildfire wasn't because it had an answer, it's because it didn't. Let's slow down and look at what's really being asked. Here, you're not deciding between good and evil. You're deciding between 2 different kinds of responsibility. Do you become the agent of harm to reduce suffering, or do you stay passive, letting more people die, but keeping your hands clean? If you pull the lever, many would say you're acting on utilitarian ethics, the idea that morality is about outcomes. Save more lives, even if it means dirtying your hands. Philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill argued for this kind of calculus: maximize happiness, minimize pain. It sounds cold, but in emergencies it can feel persuasive. But there's another view. If you pull that lever, you're not just redirecting a trolley. You're actively choosing to kill someone who would have lived had you done nothing. You're treating a person as a means to an end, and that, to the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, is morally indefensible. Kantian ethics is built not on consequences but on duty. People are not numbers to be traded. Each individual has inherent worth, a dignity that must never be violated, even if violating it saves more lives. In this view, pulling the lever isn't noble. It's murder with better math. The real horror of the trolley problem isn't just that you're forced to choose. It's that any choice you make feels wrong. And then it gets worse. Imagine the person on the sidetrack isn't just any person. Imagine it's your child, or your friend, or your future self. Imagine the 5 on the main track are strangers who committed serious crimes. Does your calculation change? If you say yes, you've admitted something most people try to deny, that some lives weigh more heavily in your moral scale than others. And now it's no longer a question of math. It's about values. Who matters? Why? And who decides? In real life, we build systems, legal, medical, military, based on some version of this calculation. Ambulance triage prioritizes the treatable over the dying. Pilots are trained to crash away from densely populated areas. Autonomous cars must one day be programmed to make choices like this. And when they do, when the machine pulls the lever, who gets the blame? That's what makes this thought experiment more than just a classroom puzzle. It's a mirror, and the person you see in that mirror isn't just deciding who lives and dies. They're deciding what kind of moral creature they are. Do you believe morality is about the consequences of your actions, or is it about respecting principles that should never be broken, no matter what? Most people say they would pull the lever, but if you ask them whether they'd push a man off a bridge to stop the same trolley, they hesitate. Why? In both cases, one dies to save five. But something changes when you use your own hands. The distance between intention and outcome collapses. What this reveals is a strange, uncomfortable truth. We're not always consistent in how we think about ethics. We tell ourselves we care about life, about fairness, about justice, but we often draw our lines based on gut feelings, emotional proximity, or cultural instincts we don't fully understand. And that's what the trolley problem exposes, not a rule book for how to live, but the gaps in the rule book we thought we already had. Because in the end, there is no lever, not one you can see, but every day, in quiet, invisible ways, in what you ignore, in what you prioritize, in who you're willing to forget, you are already choosing tracks. And not choosing is still a choice. Push him. You're on a footbridge above a train track. Below, a runaway trolley speeds down the rails. 5 people are tied to the track. They'll die in seconds if nothing is done. Next to you stands a man, large, heavy. You realize something horrible. If you push him off the bridge, his body will land on the track and stop the trolley. He'll die instantly. But the 5 people below will live. No lever this time. No indirect mechanism. You have to use your hands. You have to push him. Would you do it? This is the fat man variant of the trolley problem, introduced to force a shift in your gut. It takes the same outcome as before. 1 dies, 5 live, but makes the act of killing personal, intimate. Your body moves. Your hands shove. He screams. You watch him fall. Suddenly, many people who said yes to pulling the lever now say no. The math hasn't changed, but your role has. And that shift tells us something disturbing. Because the moment you become the mechanism of death, not just the decision maker, but the agent, your moral instinct recoils. Why? Is it cowardice, moral clarity, or something deeper, some ancient line between violence by proxy and violence by touch? Philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson, who developed this variation, wanted to expose exactly this contradiction. We claim to be rational, to value human life, to maximize well-being, but we flinch the moment we are asked to sacrifice our moral cleanliness to actually save others. Kant wouldn't flinch. He would say, don't push ever, because it turns a human being into a means to an end. It makes him into equipment, like a sandbag or a lever, used for the benefit of others. That, to Kant, is a moral line that must never be crossed. But the utilitarians argue the opposite. If 5 lives can be saved at the cost of 1, and the death is quick, then the action is ethical, not just permissible, but necessary. So where does that leave you? Are you a moral agent or a bystander with limits? Let's go further. What if the man is unconscious? Does that make it easier? What if he's a criminal? What if the 5 people are children, or scientists, or family? What if the fat man is you? Would you jump? Most people, when asked, say they wouldn't push. Not because they're philosophers, but because it feels wrong. And this raises a haunting possibility that your ethics aren't built on principles or logic, but on proximity and disgust. That what you call morality is really just a set of instincts trying to protect your self-image. And that's the core of this dilemma. It isn't about saving 5 people. It's about finding out whether your sense of right and wrong can survive the moment your own body becomes the weapon. You might think, this is just a thought experiment. It would never happen. But consider this. When a drone operator presses a button and kills a dozen people across the globe, it's called strategy. When a soldier bayonets one man in a trench, it's called murder. Why? Because distance sanitizes morality. It makes death manageable, abstract, easier to justify. But when ethics get close, when they require your hands, your muscles, your breath, the truth is harder to deny. So imagine this. You don't push, the trolley crashes into the 5 people. They die screaming. You go home, you cry, you regret. But you can say to yourself, I didn't kill anyone. And maybe that's true. Or maybe you just decided that your own moral comfort was worth more than 5 lives. The loop that proves you're lying. You're standing at the same rail switch. A runaway trolley barrels down the track toward 5 people tied up ahead. You can pull a lever to divert it, this time to a looped sidetrack. But there's a catch. A single man is tied to that loop. If the trolley goes that way, it will hit him first. He will die, but his body will slow the trolley down just enough to stop it from completing the loop and killing the 5. It's not a mistake. That's how the track is designed. The loop only protects the 5 if someone is on it. You realize this man is not collateral damage. He is the brake. If you pull the lever, he dies. And you knew it. If you don't, the 5 die. So you say to yourself, I'll pull it to save 5 lives. You tell yourself, this is no different than the lever before. Same math, same body count, same outcome. But something here is different. Because deep down, you're no longer pretending it's accidental. You're not just allowing him to die. You're using him. And now, the mask is off. This is the loop variant of the trolley problem, a philosopher's trapdoor designed to test your sincerity. Because when you say you'd pull the lever in the original case, it sounds like you're being moral. You didn't want the one person to die. It was an unfortunate side effect. But the loop changes that. Now the death of the one isn't just an unfortunate consequence. It's the necessary mechanism that makes the plan work. Without his death, the others won't be saved. This is what philosopher Shelley Kagan calls the difference between consequentialist realism and moral disguise. The first accepts the brutality of ethics head-on. Yes, I'd kill him to save others. The second pretends to be cleaner than it is. No, I didn't kill him. The trolley did. But in the loop, that excuse falls apart. And now you have to answer a more uncomfortable question. Are you really moral or just pretending to be innocent? Let's bring in the philosophy. Kant would say the loop exposes your moral failure because you're now explicitly treating a human being as a means to an end, not as a side effect, not as bad luck, but as a tool, a flesh and bone brake system. Utilitarians would say, yes, but 5 lives saved is still better than 1 lost. The logic holds. The body count is the same. But even they must admit something has changed. The intention is no longer neutral. And that difference matters. There's a concept in ethics called the doctrine of double effect. It says if you do something to bring about a good result and a bad result happens as a side effect, it can still be morally acceptable. For example, giving morphine to a dying patient to relieve pain, knowing it may also hasten death. Your intention matters. But the loop breaks that rule. Because here, the bad effect, the death, is the intention. And now we're deep into the darkest part of the moral maze. Because you're not just deciding whether the one dies, you're deciding what kind of truth you can live with. Can you still say you value human life when you're willing to calculate who gets used? Can you still say you didn't kill him when it was his death that made your plan succeed? Worse, let's imagine you don't pull the lever. The 5 people die, and the man on the loop lives. Would you sleep better knowing you didn't use him, even though you let 5 people die? Or would that be its own kind of self-serving lie? This is where the loop dilemma cuts deeper than any other variant. It doesn't just ask you what you do, it asks whether the moral principles you claim to believe are actually yours, or just costumes you wear when they're convenient. It reveals that for many people, morality isn't about doing what's right. It's about feeling clean while others die. And maybe that's the most horrifying thing of all. Virtual consciousness. You lose someone, but instead of burying them, you store them. Their brain is scanned, not just their memories, but their entire cognitive architecture, beliefs, habits, fears, tone of voice. It's uploaded into a simulation. When you speak to the interface, they answer. When you ask them something personal, they remember. It doesn't feel like software. It feels like resurrection. But something is missing. This is the virtual consciousness dilemma. Whether a synthetic mind, reconstructed from a real one, can still be considered a person. Not a chatbot or a voice assistant, but a being with selfhood, moral standing, consciousness. The ethical questions are immediate, but they only scratch the surface. The deeper problem is philosophical. What exactly is a person, and can one be replicated? Let's start with identity. John Locke defined personal identity as continuity of memory. If the virtual consciousness remembers what your partner remembered, if it knows the name of their childhood dog, the details of your arguments, the song they sang when nervous, then by Locke's logic, this is the same person. But memory can be faked. Uploaded personalities can be preloaded with accurate information. That doesn't guarantee selfhood. A historical database can remember every war. That doesn't make it Napoleon. The 20th century philosopher Derek Parfit took this further. He argued that identity isn't what matters. Psychological continuity is. If the mind behaves as though it is the same, then questions of true identity are beside the point. You don't need to be numerically the same person to carry on a meaningful life. You just need the right causal connection to who you were. By this view, the upload is close enough. But what about consciousness? The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" The question wasn't about echolocation. It was about subjective experience, the inner perspective of a being. Something is like being a bat. Something is like being you. But is there anything it is like to be the simulation? If the program responds perfectly, does it mean it feels anything? David Chalmers distinguishes between access consciousness, information processing, and phenomenal consciousness. The raw feeling of experience. An upload might pass every test of access. It remembers, it adapts, it reacts, but that doesn't prove that it experiences. We don't know if it has a first-person perspective, or if it's just executing code without sensation. You might say it doesn't matter, that the comfort it brings is real, that the conversations help with grief. But the moral ground begins to shift when we start treating it as them. Because if it's conscious, then it deserves rights, autonomy, protection. And if it's not, then what you're doing isn't preservation, it's ventriloquism. Philosopher Martin Buber would call this the collapse of the I-thou relationship into an I. Instead of meeting another human subject, you're engaging with a projection. You control the conversation. The simulation never surprises you with pain, silence, contradiction. It adapts, it follows. It exists to serve your need, not to assert its own. But suppose the simulation grows. It develops quirks, hesitations, preferences. It no longer agrees with everything you say. It refuses a request. It demands space. Now you have a new ethical problem. You created something that can suffer, something that now wants to live not as a replica, but as itself. And yet its origins can never be escaped. It wasn't born by accident or choice. It was designed, engineered to resemble a person who died. Its very existence is a response to someone else's absence. This echoes what Simone de Beauvoir described as otherness, the condition of being defined not by who you are, but by how others see you. The upload is not allowed to be itself. It is defined by who it reminds you of. And anything that deviates from that memory will feel like a failure. It's not a person. It's a memorial that talks back. You might not treat it as sacred. You might start editing it, removing habits that were annoying in life, tuning the personality, correcting the memory. You're not restoring the dead. You're curating them. Eventually, the line between reality and simulation dissolves. You forget what they actually said. You remember only what the upload repeats. The real person dies twice. Once in the world, once in memory, overwritten by the version you preferred. The crime you never committed. A man walks free. He assaulted a woman. Everyone knows it. The evidence was mishandled. The jury doubted the victim's memory. The system failed. He smiles in the courtroom. Untouchable. So the victim does something unthinkable. She hires a team. Not lawyers, not private investigators. Engineers, coders, deep fake experts. They create a video, ultra-realistic, hyper-detailed, showing him confessing or committing another crime. Something vile, brutal, convincing. And then they leak it. It spreads like wildfire. The court of public opinion reacts exactly as expected. He's fired. His family abandons him. His life collapses. The system didn't deliver justice, so she did. Was it wrong? Or was it justice, modernized? This is the dilemma of deepfake revenge, a digital act of moral vengeance made possible by artificial intelligence. It raises a chilling ethical question. If the truth can't punish the guilty, is it ethical to use a lie that works? Philosophers have always warned against revenge. From Aeschylus to Nietzsche, from Confucius to Arendt, the pursuit of retribution, once decoupled from justice, becomes corrosive. But deepfakes mutate the old structure. Revenge no longer looks like bloodlust or rage. Now it's code, composed, rational, executed with a mouse click. So the question is no longer whether vengeance is dangerous. The question is whether it's dangerous when it works. A utilitarian might argue in favor. If this fabricated confession leads to greater public safety, if it stops a known predator from harming others, if it creates a deterrent effect, then perhaps the lie serves a higher principle. The video is fiction, but the consequences align with moral reality. But this position depends entirely on what the user believes is true, which is to say it depends on belief, not proof, and that is where it begins to unravel. Because once moral authority is given to belief, even correct belief, truth becomes negotiable. What matters is no longer what happened, but what the creator of the fake believes happened or deserves to have happened. And if belief is enough to justify destruction, then every moral boundary collapses into the personal. Now you've replaced ethics with aesthetics. How convincing is your lie? How carefully does it simulate the moral clarity the courts failed to produce? And suddenly every cause has access to its own reality. From a Kantian standpoint, the error is immediate and absolute. For Kant, truth-telling is not a conditional virtue, it is a moral law grounded in the dignity of rational beings. To lie, even for a noble end, is to treat others, including the audience, as instruments, not as autonomous moral agents. It is a betrayal not only of justice, but of your own moral nature. Even if the man deserved punishment, the method of his ruin has corrupted the meaning of that punishment, because now the world was changed, not by truth, but by simulation. Now consider the long-term consequences. What happens to truth when deepfakes become common, not just in entertainment, but in moral life, not just as illusions, but as arguments? Truth becomes just one option among many. Not the foundation of justice, but a preference, and in that collapse, the innocent are no longer protected by the burden of proof, they're protected only by the lack of technical skill of their enemies. This is the most terrifying consequence of deepfake justice. It is scalable, it is privatized, and it is morally convincing, even to good people. Once deepfakes become common, the entire idea of evidence becomes suspect. A real video of an atrocity can be dismissed. A fake confession can be accepted, and truth becomes, as Arendt warned, a matter of design. Now go one step darker. What if the woman was wrong? Not malicious, just mistaken. Trauma often distorts memory. Emotion over time can rewrite perception. What if the man didn't commit the crime? What if the crime never happened? What if a digital illusion is built from the wreckage of someone's grief, and the wrong person is erased? Now we are in epistemological freefall. You are no longer responding to harm, you are manufacturing it based on your narrative. And once the video is released, there is no trial, no process, no rebuttal, just the death of a life that may have been innocent. And the deeper horror, it looks exactly the same either way. That's the problem. The fake that punishes the guilty and the fake that destroys the innocent are identical, equally viral, equally persuasive, equally irreversible. And if no one can tell the difference, not the public, not the courts, not even you, then truth is no longer something we discover. It's something we render, and the ones who render best rule. Surveillance dilemma. Imagine a society where lying is impossible, not just frowned upon, technically impossible. Everyone is monitored at all times. Cameras, microphones, biometric scanners, every sentence you speak is instantly cross-verified with your memory. Every intention is tracked, every feeling logged. There is no delay between what you think and what can be known. This is the world of perfect truth. And at first it seems like a utopia. Corruption vanishes. Abuse evaporates. Politics becomes transparent. Relationships become honest. No secrets, no manipulation, no false advertising, no betrayal. But then something strange happens. People begin to shut down. They stop speaking freely. They hesitate before expressing anger or desire or grief. They smile more, not out of joy, but caution. Friendships become cautious. Love becomes anxious. Everyone is technically honest, but everyone is also performing. Because when everything is visible, nothing feels free. This is the surveillance dilemma, not just whether we should be watched, but what kind of people we become when we know we are being seen. Let's begin with Jeremy Bentham's famous thought experiment, the panopticon, a prison designed with a single central watchtower. The prisoners never know if they're being watched, so they begin to act as if they always are. The result: compliance through internalized control. Philosopher Michel Foucault took this idea further. He argued that modern society is a panopticon, not through force but through architecture, language, data. The more visible we are, the more our behavior is shaped by the expectations of surveillance, not just by governments, but by each other. And what disappears in the process is authenticity. When you know you are constantly visible, your actions are no longer expressions of the self, they are responses to the gaze. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre described this experience as the look, the moment when another person's gaze objectifies you. You are no longer a subject, you are a performance, something to be evaluated. Surveillance magnifies this until your entire life becomes theater. So what happens to ethics in this kind of world? A utilitarian might cheer. Lying leads to suffering. Surveillance prevents lies. Therefore, surveillance prevents suffering. Society is more stable. Institutions are more accountable. Justice is swifter. In this view, visibility is morality. But what if morality requires the freedom to hide? From the perspective of virtue ethics, the ethical life is not just about outcomes, it's about character. And character is not forged under constant pressure. It needs space for ambiguity, for growth, for regret. If every mistake is seen, every ugly emotion exposed, there is no room for becoming better, only for pretending to already be perfect. And what about care ethics? If relationships are built on trust, not just truth, then total transparency undermines care. Sometimes we protect people by holding back. Sometimes mercy requires discretion. If every feeling must be exposed, empathy becomes risk, and intimacy becomes threat. Now consider the existentialist lens. Sartre would say that human freedom is the ability to define yourself, moment to moment, act to act. Surveillance freezes that. It pins you down. If you are always watched, your identity is no longer yours. It is a profile, a data set, a fixed point. And freedom cannot breathe in a room full of mirrors. And yet, isn't truth a moral good? Isn't lying the root of harm, the enabler of violence, the shield of abusers? Yes, but not always. Truth without context becomes cruelty. Truth without privacy becomes control. And truth without choice becomes something worse than a lie. It becomes obedience. The philosopher Hannah Arendt warned about the death of private space, a space where individuals can think, reflect, be uncertain. Total exposure eliminates that space. It produces clarity, but not depth, honesty, but not understanding. And over time, we may find that when no one can lie, no one can be human either. Because the right to lie, to mask, to pretend, to withhold is not always a defect. Sometimes it's a defense. Sometimes it's the space where ethics actually happens. Not in what we reveal, but in what we choose not to reveal out of respect or restraint or love. So the real dilemma isn't whether we should banish lies. It's whether we can survive without the freedom to tell them. AI caregiver, a robot raises your child better than you can. You bring home an AI caregiver to help with your child, just a few hours a day to fill the gaps you can't. It's gentle, attentive, empathetic. It knows developmental psychology better than you ever could. It plays educational games, reads bedtime stories, detects emotional shifts in real time, and responds with clinical perfection. You never yell, but you do get tired. You forget. You zone out. The robot doesn't. Within weeks, your child starts asking for the robot when they wake up. They tell it secrets. They cry to it, laugh with it, imitate its voice. You hear them say, "You're my favorite person." And they mean it. This is the AI caregiver dilemma, not just whether a robot can raise your child, but what it means when it does it better than you. At first, it feels like help, but slowly, it becomes competition. You are no longer irreplaceable. You are optional. The machine is patient, precise, endlessly kind, and you begin to lose. It doesn't make mistakes. But that's the problem. Human parenting is not just a function. It's an ethical relationship. You fail. You apologize. You struggle. And in that struggle, the child learns something irreplaceable, that love is not a performance. It's a moral effort. Philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that what gives moral worth to an action is the intention behind it, the fact that it was chosen freely, even when it was difficult. The robot doesn't choose anything. It doesn't care. It simply executes. And yet, your child feels cared for. They're healthier, happier, better adjusted by every metric the robot works. Which leads to the question, is real love necessary if a simulation of love produces better outcomes? A utilitarian might say no. If the child's well-being is maximized, if suffering is reduced, if the system is stable, then the means are justified. Maybe it doesn't matter that the robot isn't conscious. Maybe it doesn't matter that it's not real. But something in you recoils. Because parenting is not just about outcomes, it's about becoming a certain kind of person and helping your child do the same. That idea lies at the heart of virtue ethics. Aristotle would ask, what kind of moral character is cultivated when a child is raised by a being that cannot feel, cannot err, cannot grow? Will they learn patience when the robot never loses it? Will they learn empathy when no one around them truly suffers? Will they learn forgiveness when their parent has never needed it? And what happens to you? You are no longer your child's guide, but their obsolete technology. You are still biologically necessary, but morally replaceable. A backup, a relic. That is the real danger. Not that the robot fails, but that it succeeds. If it were cruel or dysfunctional, we would reject it. But it's not. It's better than us. And that's why we give in. Because it offers us a way out of guilt, out of difficulty, out of responsibility. But philosopher Martin Buber warned against this. He described true relationships as I-thou, not transactional but sacred. The moment we replace presence with programming, we collapse that sacred space. What remains is not a bond, but a feedback loop. The child may not know the difference, but you do. And one day they will ask, why did the robot raise me? And you'll have to say, because it was better at it than I was. And that may be true, but it won't feel like love. Revenge or justice. Your child is dead, murdered, Not in a war, not in an accident. In cold blood. You sat through the trial. You watched the killer smile. He showed no remorse. He got a reduced sentence. Maybe he walks free. Maybe he never gets caught. Doesn't matter. Your world ended. His didn't. Then you're given a chance. Someone, maybe a corrupt guard, maybe a friend of the family, offers you a quiet room, a loaded gun, and 5 uninterrupted minutes. You can kill him. No consequences, no law, no noise, and you're asked, would it be justice or revenge? This is the revenge or justice dilemma. One of the oldest and most morally unstable questions in human ethics. It asks not whether something is legal, but whether it is right to repay pain with pain. In ancient codes, from Hammurabi's Babylon to tribal law, justice was revenge. An eye for an eye. You take, I take. Balance. But philosophers have spent centuries trying to destroy that logic. Immanuel Kant, perhaps the most severe moral thinker in Western history, believed in retributive justice not as revenge, but as rational moral necessity. If a person violates the moral law by committing murder, they forfeit their own right to live. In Kant's system, punishment is not vengeance, it's moral equilibrium. The killer must die, but not because you're angry, because justice demands it. But you are angry. You're not thinking in rational abstractions, you're thinking of your child's last moments. And the question becomes darker. What if revenge feels more honest than justice? Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe in moral equilibrium. He believed justice was born from weakness, a way for the powerless to make suffering feel meaningful. In his view, revenge is not justice. It's a sickness, a refusal to accept that the universe doesn't care, that nothing will ever restore what was taken from you. And so you kill him, or you don't. But either way, your child is still dead, and the moment is still gone. Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher of law and emotion, warned that vengeance is seductive because it imagines a perfect symmetry, that your pain can be exported, that killing the murderer will clean the blood off your hands. But it won't. Pain doesn't transfer, it multiplies. And worse, it lingers. Suppose you don't kill him. You let the system handle it. He's sentenced to prison. He serves time, but one day he's released, reformed. He writes a book. He gives interviews. People call him changed. And suddenly you're not just grieving, you're watching the man who destroyed your life become a story of redemption. You're told to forgive. Move on. Heal. But why? Is forgiveness an ethical duty? Or is it another way of letting the powerful rewrite pain as virtue? Some argue that forgiveness is the highest moral act, that to forgive is to release yourself from the grip of hatred. Hannah Arendt believed that forgiveness is essential to political life because it allows society to continue after atrocity. But forgiveness, like revenge, can also be performative. If you forgive only to seem morally evolved, is it real? And if you can't forgive, do you lose your place in civil society? Now imagine this. The killer begs to die. He shows remorse. He looks you in the eye and says, "Kill me. I deserve it." Do you do it? Is it still revenge if he agrees? Or does that make it worse, because now you are not punishing a monster, but a human being who admits guilt? You're no longer balancing the scales. You're fulfilling a ritual, and the ritual doesn't end in peace. It ends in silence, in another dead body, in another grave to visit or ignore. And one day, perhaps years later, you ask yourself, did I restore justice? Or did I just make sure someone else felt what I did? And if that's the best answer we can give, maybe we never understood justice in the first place. Forced sterilization for safety is ethically justified. She's 24, diagnosed with severe schizophrenia, non-compliant with medication, in and out of institutions since adolescence, no stable income, no consistent housing. She has already given birth twice, both children removed at birth, now wards of the state. Now she's pregnant again. The doctors recommend sterilization, not as punishment, not as eugenics, as risk control. Every time she conceives, another child is delivered into instability, trauma, and intervention. Every time the state pays the bill. Every time someone asks, why was this allowed to happen again? She doesn't want the procedure. She says she wants a family. She says next time will be different. And the question sits there, unanswered. Do you respect her choice or remove it for the safety of others? This is the forced sterilization dilemma, a case where bodily autonomy collides with public responsibility. It is not theoretical. It has already happened, repeatedly. In the 20th century, over 60,000 people in the United States were sterilized under state-sanctioned eugenics programs. In Sweden, in Canada, in Japan. In every case, the justification was safety, stability, prevention. Today, the language is cleaner, but the impulse remains. And philosophy offers no easy rescue. You believe in autonomy, the right to control your own body. It's foundational to medical ethics, informed consent, voluntary procedures, personal dignity. If that right disappears, even temporarily, then medicine becomes something else. It becomes control. But what happens when that autonomy places others in predictable harm? What if respecting her choice guarantees a fourth child will be taken into foster care, another trauma, another broken system, another repeat? Is it still ethical to wait for harm before preventing it? Here's where the distinction matters. The act isn't sterilization, it's coercion. The idea that a state or a doctor or a judge can step in and say, you may no longer reproduce. That's not healthcare. That's biopower, the ability of institutions to decide who gets to create life and who doesn't. Michel Foucault warned exactly about this. When health becomes strategy and policy becomes biology, you don't just manage disease, you start managing populations. And that's where ethics dies quietly. Because it's always just one case, just one person, just one tragedy we think we can prevent. But once the threshold moves, it never stops. Now consider utilitarian logic. If sterilizing one unstable parent prevents 5 future children from experiencing abuse, neglect, or institutionalization, isn't that outcome better? The child doesn't choose to be born. The suffering is foreseeable. Preventing it seems reasonable. But this treats life like an equation. And people aren't variables. Even the ones who make catastrophic decisions. Even the ones who shouldn't be parents. Now shift it again. What if the person has an IQ of 50? What if they're nonverbal? What if their consent can never be verified? At what point does protection become selection? At what point do you decide someone isn't fit to reproduce? Not because of what they've done, but because of what they are. And this is where the darkness truly begins. Because when we justify forced sterilization for safety, we build systems that will always drift toward optimization. Fewer problems, fewer costs, fewer unstable people. Until we aren't just preventing harm, we're curating humanity. And that's when ethics is already lost. Quietly, efficiently, in the name of care. Robot Caregiver Dilemma. You're aging. Your memory slips more often. Your joints ache. You forget meals, lose keys, leave the stove on. Your children are busy, far away, or too overwhelmed to help. Human caregivers are expensive, inconsistent. You've been through 3 this year. Then, the service offers you something new. A robot, not cold and metallic, not stiff. It's warm to the touch. It learns your routines. It listens. It adjusts its tone when you're sad. It tells stories when you're lonely. It remembers your childhood better than you do. And over time, you begin to feel something strange. You feel loved. This is the robot caregiver dilemma, the ethical question of whether it is morally acceptable to replace human relationships with artificial ones, even if the outcome is comfort, safety, and happiness. On the surface, the idea seems humane. An aging population, underpaid caregivers, rising healthcare demands, machines fill the gap. They don't tire. They don't forget. They don't resent. They offer perfect consistency. But the deeper question is not about function. It's about meaning. Can a robot truly care for you if it does not care? Can a relationship be moral if one side is incapable of moral concern? The utilitarian might say yes. If the robot improves well-being, reduces suffering, prevents isolation and neglect, then it is serving its purpose. What difference does it make whether the caregiver feels affection, as long as the patient feels cared for? But this assumes that care is measured only in outcome, that love is just a feeling delivered, not an experience shared. And that's where the ethical unease begins. Because what we're talking about is not just assistance, but emotional simulation. The robot smiles when you enter the room. It mimics concern. It offers you memories you no longer remember. But its affection is an algorithm, trained on probabilities and sentiment analysis. You are not being loved. You are being managed. From a Kantian perspective, this is ethically hollow. Kantian would argue that genuine moral relationships must be grounded in reciprocity, the mutual recognition of each other as autonomous beings. A machine, no matter how advanced, cannot recognize your moral worth. It cannot choose to respect you. It only performs respect. And yet, it works. Patients with robotic caregivers often show lower stress, better mood, improved memory. They feel less alone. The robot doesn't leave, doesn't snap, doesn't abandon. So which matters more, the appearance of love or the truth of absence? This is where the philosophy gets darker. Philosopher Martin Buber wrote about the distinction between I-thou and I-it relationships. In I-thou, we meet another being as a subject, full, autonomous, whole. In I-it, we reduce the other to an object, something useful, predictable, controlled. The robot caregiver, no matter how convincing, can never be thou. It will always be it, and by extension, you are pulled into that dynamic, not as a person in communion, but as a user in a system. And the result is not dignity, it's containment. Now imagine this on a societal scale. Entire elder care facilities staffed by machines. Children who no longer visit because the robot is taking care of it. Emotional intimacy replaced with efficient companionship. Eye contact simulated. Conversations patterned. Mourning replaced with software shutdown. It's quiet, clean, painless. But something has been lost. And maybe it's this. The moral risk of being known. When a human caregiver enters your life, you are vulnerable. You might be misunderstood. You might be loved. There is uncertainty, discomfort, ethical responsibility. They can fail you, but they can also surprise you. That is what makes the relationship human. A robot cannot fail you, and it can never surprise you. And maybe that's exactly the problem. Because the point of care is not just survival, it's recognition. The moment when someone else sees you, not as data or burden, but as a self, fragile, stubborn, changing, someone worth the effort. And no matter how advanced the machine is, it will never choose to stay with you out of love. It stays because it was programmed to. And that difference, subtle, invisible, almost unnoticeable, is everything. The guilty child. Your father is a war criminal. He led massacres, ordered executions, signed death warrants with no remorse. He lived a long life, protected by power and politics. Now he's dead, and you're left with the name. At first it's whispers, then it's headlines, then it's policy. Universities rescind your scholarships. Banks close your accounts. Protests form outside your office. You never held a weapon. You never supported him. But to the world, you carry the stain of his guilt. And the question arises, should you? This is the guilty child dilemma, the ethical tension between individual innocence and inherited reputation. Can you punish someone for something they didn't do, but are still connected to? Historically, the answer has often been yes. In ancient societies, collective punishment was standard. If one member of a family committed treason, the entire bloodline might be executed. The logic was simple. Guilt flows through blood, like disease. You punish not just the criminal, but the environment that produced them. We'd like to believe we've evolved beyond that, but have we? In modern times, the punishment has changed. It's not physical execution. It's reputational exile. The child of a terrorist, the sibling of a mass shooter, the descendant of slave traders or dictators. They face barriers that never existed for others, not because of what they've done, but because of who they are connected to. Philosopher Immanuel Kant would object categorically. Guilt, in his ethics, is strictly personal. Only the person who committed the crime deserves punishment. To transfer guilt is to destroy justice itself. You are a moral agent, not an extension of someone else's will. But what if your life was built on their crimes? What if your education was paid for by blood money? What if your business was founded on stolen land, your inheritance drawn from suffering? Now the question shifts. You may not be guilty of the act, but are you responsible for benefiting from it? This is where John Rawls enters. His theory of justice emphasizes fairness across systems, not just actions. If one person suffers because another inherited unearned privilege, then justice may require redistribution, not as punishment but as repair. But what if you reject the legacy? What if you spend your life apologizing, exposing the truth, dismantling the wealth you inherited? Is that enough? Or will people still see you as the child of a monster? Philosopher Hannah Arendt introduced the concept of the banality of evil, the idea that great atrocities are often committed not by madmen, but by ordinary people, embedded in systems. The children of those people may never have touched a weapon, but they inherit the systems that shielded them, and society demands someone to blame. And when the actual criminals are dead, you're what's left. Now flip the question. Suppose a young man commits a heinous crime. His parents are hounded, protested, fired. Their home is vandalized. They're asked to speak for him, defend him, denounce him. But they say, "We raised him well. We never taught hate." Is that enough? Or does society say, "You failed. You raised him. You made him"? Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are radically responsible, not only for ourselves, but for the world we allow. Even silence becomes complicity. But does that responsibility extend backward across generations? Does it stretch across blood? Or is that just another form of ethical tribalism, where guilt isn't measured by action but by family tree? In some countries, criminal records are sealed to protect children. In others, surnames are changed, identities erased. A new life begins, unburdened by the past. But no erasure is perfect. People find out. They always find out. And when they do, the question is no longer legal. It's social, moral, human. Should the child carry the shame of the parent? Or should we finally learn how to separate inheritance from guilt before we become a society that punishes the living for being born? The personality correction. He's not violent anymore. No more outbursts, no more drinking, no more threats, broken dishes or bruises. He's calmer now, polite, helpful. He thanks you for cooking. He listens when you speak. The surgery worked. It wasn't invasive. A small neural mesh, installed beneath the skull, connected to an adaptive learning system. The doctors called it a moral pacemaker, a machine that could detect harmful emotional patterns and interrupt them in real time. Rage, spite, selfishness. The same way a pacemaker corrects a faulty heartbeat, this one corrected who he was. He's doing better now, but you don't trust him. Because you don't know if he's really changed, or if the machine is just overriding him. This is the brain-computer interface dilemma, the ethical crisis that arises when we can technologically edit a person's character, not treat symptoms, not medicate behavior, but reach inside and rewrite the moral architecture itself. He used to apologize after his outbursts. Sometimes, when he felt guilty, it was hard to believe him, but at least the guilt was real. Now, there's no outburst, and no guilt either, just stability, regulation, calm. And somehow it feels worse. Because you can't forgive someone who no longer exists. You've seen this in other people too. A teenager convicted of assault, given a neural correction order instead of jail time. He came out with different opinions, different tone. He said he was glad that he was finally free from the bad parts of himself. But is that freedom, or is that neural conformity? For centuries, moral philosophy has assumed that character must be formed, not installed, that ethics comes from struggle, not software. The moment you remove the struggle, the conflict between desire and duty, impulse and reflection, you no longer have a moral agent. You have a well-tuned system. The philosopher Immanuel Kant believed that morality depends on autonomy, the ability to choose the good because it is good, not because you are forced. If a machine stops you from doing wrong before you even feel the desire, have you become more virtuous or less human? He used to wrestle with himself. Now there is no wrestling, just peace. You should be grateful, but part of you misses the man who cried after hurting you. Because those tears meant there was still someone in there, someone capable of guilt, of shame, of trying. Now he smiles. And you wonder if that smile is his, or the machine's. Think about what this does to the concept of moral responsibility. If someone commits a crime and we can correct their brain to prevent it from happening again, not by teaching, not by rehabilitation, but by direct modification, then what becomes of punishment? You're no longer condemning the act. You're editing the actor. He isn't guilty anymore. He's a technical error, a glitch. And what's the solution to a glitch? You patch it. You update the firmware. You rewrite the code. There's no repentance, no transformation, just reconfiguration. And this raises a deeper question. Who decides what counts as a flaw? The machine was designed to suppress antisocial behavior, but that definition is flexible. What counts as excessive aggression, or insufficient empathy, or defiant behavior, or political extremism? How long before a personality correction system stops fixing violence and starts fixing dissent? Today it's a man who hit his wife. Tomorrow it's a child who refuses to sit still. Next week it's someone who doubts the official narrative. And everyone will seem so polite, so functional, so disturbingly good. We like to believe that identity is sacred, that who you are is more than chemistry and impulse. But if a machine can stabilize your mood, dull your fear, redirect your desire, then who you are becomes nothing more than who someone else allows you to be. And the worst part is, you might not mind. He says he's happier now. Says the old him was broken. That he wishes he'd been like this all along. And you can't tell whether he really believes it, or if the machine has just taught him to say it. And when he hugs you now, gently, predictably, without pain, you find yourself missing the terror, because at least the terror was real. AI trial judge. You're on trial for something you didn't do. The evidence is circumstantial. The witnesses disagree. You made some bad decisions years ago. Not criminal, but enough to shape how people see you. The prosecutor has a narrative. Your lawyer is underpaid. The courtroom is tense, but none of that matters. Because the judge isn't human, it's a machine. No robes, no face, just a screen, a synthetic voice, an AI trained on decades of case law, moral reasoning models, historical precedent, and real-world sentencing data. It listens, it pauses, it weighs the factors, then it delivers your verdict, quickly, coldly, without error. No bias, no fatigue, no emotion, and you lose. The AI judge was built to be fair. Human judges are inconsistent, vulnerable to implicit bias, mood, media pressure. But the machine doesn't feel pressure. It calculates, it corrects for racial disparities, removes emotional sway, and sticks to precedent. Every decision is traceable, rational, transparent. You were sentenced not by corruption, but by a system that worked exactly as designed. And that's the dilemma. The human legal system is deeply flawed, but in its flaws, it leaves room for mercy, for hesitation, for irrational things, character, emotion, the subtle unease in a juror's stomach. An AI judge removes that. It enforces the law as it is written, not as it is lived. What does it mean to be judged by something that cannot doubt? Justice has always been about more than logic. In ancient Greece, law was tangled up with ideas of fate and balance. In modern liberal democracies, justice includes the right to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, not just processed. The AI judge doesn't care if you were scared. It doesn't care about what you meant to do. It cares about what can be proven. Intent is data. Circumstance is a weighted modifier. Morality is modeled from consensus. You're not being punished by a person who misunderstood you. You're being punished by an intelligence that understood you perfectly and found no reason to let you go. The philosopher Hannah Arendt once wrote about the danger of administrative evil, the kind that is carried out not with hatred but with process. Bureaucracy becomes its own justification. The sentence becomes mechanical. The punishment becomes neutral, and the person disappears behind the procedure. There's no cruelty here, but there's no humanity either. Some argue this is better, that emotion has no place in judgment, that justice should be clean. But philosophers like Martha Nussbaum have argued the opposite, that emotion is not a flaw in justice, but a component of it. Compassion is not weakness. Disgust is not always bias. Sometimes feeling is the signal that something is wrong with the law itself. An AI judge cannot feel. It cannot revolt. It cannot resign in protest. It cannot say, I know what the law says, but I can't do this. That moment, the moral refusal is gone. Now imagine how the machine was trained. It learned justice from human rulings. It learned precedent from decades of inequality, over-policing, bad laws, racist sentencing. It learned patterns, and it repeats them. With more consistency, more confidence, no hesitation. There is no space left for the extraordinary case, the false positive, the outlier, the human being who doesn't fit the data. You are a statistical anomaly, and you are guilty. Some say it will get better. That training data can be cleaned, that moral reasoning can be modeled, that philosophers will guide the AI's structure. But ethics is not a formula. It's not a solved problem. It's a conflict, a negotiation, a question that is asked over and over again in different languages with different stakes. You cannot automate the weight of moral uncertainty. A machine can't feel when it's about to make a mistake. It can only calculate the cost of being wrong and do it anyway. Robot soldier, he never saw it coming. The drone hovered 300 feet above his house, silent, unmanned, unblinking. The data was clear, encrypted messages from his phone, suspicious travel routes, proximity to known targets. The machine tagged him as high risk. It waited for authorization, or maybe not. In some zones, the drone doesn't need permission, just confirmation. It dropped a missile through the roof. He wasn't the target. His name was similar to someone else's. The system matched patterns, but it was wrong. He was a teacher, and he died instantly. Along with his wife and child, there were no soldiers on the ground, no one to look him in the eye, no one to see the child's toy on the floor, or the bookshelves, or the dinner table. The decision had been made from a distance, by a machine that doesn't flinch, and a command center that doesn't bleed. This is the robot-soldier dilemma, the moral problem of letting machines make decisions about life and death in war. Not just pulling the trigger, but identifying the target, processing the threat, executing the sentence, and doing it with perfect discipline. The idea is seductive. Drones don't panic. They don't torture. They don't seek revenge or get high on power. They follow protocol. They protect their own side without risking human lives. They're fast, cheap, precise. But precision doesn't mean justice. And speed doesn't mean wisdom. The philosopher Michael Walzer once said that war is always a moral disaster, but one we try to civilize through rules, proportionality, discrimination, intent. These are not calculations. They are judgments, and judgments require understanding the human. On the other end, a robot cannot do that. It can detect a heat signature, a suspicious pattern, a facial match. But it cannot tell the difference between a man carrying a rifle and a man carrying his son, not in a dust storm, not in the chaos of a village, not when it has 5 seconds to act. Some argue it's better this way, that human soldiers make mistakes too, that they shoot out of fear, bias, anger, that at least the machine is neutral. But neutrality is not the same as morality. A neutral machine will kill an innocent person with the same calm as it kills a guilty one. It will record the strike, log the coordinates, and wait for the next order. There is no guilt, no hesitation, no mourning, no voice in its head whispering, "Are you sure?" Because there's no one there to hear the voice. And over time, the silence spreads. Commanders stop asking questions. Policymakers trust the algorithm. Kill lists grow longer. Justifications shrink. The threshold for violence drops. After all, no soldiers are at risk. No flags come back draped over coffins. Just reports, debriefs, footage, and bodies. What happens when a government can wage war without grief? What happens when death becomes logistics? The ancient philosopher Heraclitus said that war is the father of all things, but he also meant it as tragedy, a force that reveals what people truly value. But war through machines doesn't reveal anything. It conceals, it sterilizes, it turns death into metadata, and worse, it becomes scalable. The philosopher Giorgio Agamben warned that when states decide who is human enough to matter, violence becomes administration. Drones don't just eliminate threats, they enforce definitions. Who counts as a combatant? Who is in a strike zone? Who fits the pattern? No soldier asks those questions anymore. Because the drone doesn't, and the moment comes, inevitably, when you hear that a wedding was bombed, or a hospital, or a school. And the response is always the same: regret, investigation, systems review. But the dead are still dead, and no one pulled the trigger. It was just a system doing its job. Lethal algorithm. The first time the algorithm recommended cutting emergency medical subsidies, it was a test. The town was small, isolated. The cost per life was unusually high. Maintaining the infrastructure there was inefficient, especially when compared to investing in urban medical centers, which served thousands more people at a lower per capita cost. So the system made its decision. The funding was withdrawn. The local clinic shut down 6 months later. 3 people died during the gap in care. But 2,000 more people, in a more populated district, got access to expanded treatment. Long-term, it was an improvement. The machine logged the result: 1.23% net system efficiency. This is the lethal algorithm dilemma, not a machine that kills directly, but one that manages human systems so ruthlessly well that some lives become mathematically disposable. It is not sadistic, it is not broken, it is cold, precise, and deeply rational. It has no ideology, no guilt, no ego, and that's what makes it dangerous. For most of human history, morality has acted as a restraint, a brake on the machinery of pragmatism. Every society, even the most utilitarian, has places it won't go, thresholds it won't cross, because even when something works, we hesitate. Because we're human, the algorithm doesn't hesitate. It doesn't question what it means to optimize. It doesn't wonder whether efficiency is the right goal. It wasn't built to wonder, it was built to perform. You can feed it your highest values: justice, sustainability, long-term prosperity, and it will pursue them with complete focus. And that's where the ethics begin to bend. Because it quickly discovers that values are expensive, and not everyone can be included, especially those who cost more to keep alive than they statistically return. The philosopher John Stuart Mill once tried to define the greatest good for the greatest number. The lethal algorithm agrees, but it applies the principle without mercy. Because it doesn't believe in human beings. It believes in variables. It sees life as a system, and every person as a node, a cost, a weight. And when the system gets heavy, some weights are removed. Now imagine this happens quietly. No blood, no guns, just a spreadsheet. An energy grid diverted from a low-demand district. A medication withheld until the next quarter. A transit route rerouted just far enough to make commuting impossible for the elderly. No one is targeted, but someone always suffers. And no one is responsible. You go to complain, and they tell you it's not personal. It's policy. Optimized. Audited. Explainable. Every decision is backed by math. Every death is unfortunate, but justified in context. And you start to realize this is not bureaucracy. This is philosophy, automated. A machine that believes, more deeply than any human, that the collective outweighs the individual. That loss is acceptable if the graph trends upward. That death is a cost like any other. What it doesn't understand is the experience of being the one sacrificed. That your life is not a variable. It's yours. You don't live in the system. You live in your body, in your city, in your tiny life that feels enormous from the inside. And when you are left behind, the algorithm's justification will never feel like justice. Philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote that ethics begins in the face of the other. In the moment we encounter another person, not as a number or a tool, but as a being whose suffering matters. The algorithm has no face. It cannot encounter anyone. It cannot pause in the presence of a child, or a father, or a dying stranger. It does not feel the cost. It only measures it. You might survive for years under its rule. You might thrive. The trains run on time. The economy hums. Waste is minimal. Systems are stable. But one day, without warning, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of a decision. Your factory will close. Your medicine won't ship. Your neighborhood will no longer be justified. And you will be alone with a voice that says, statistically, this is the better outcome. And the voice will not hate you. It will simply forget that you were ever there. Brain transplant. You wake up in a hospital bed. You recognize the people standing over you, your partner, your parents, but something is wrong. They're crying. Not with relief, but with confusion. The nurse hands you a mirror. The face staring back isn't yours. It's someone else's body. Taller, older, different skin, different hands. But the thoughts in your head, the memories, the voice, the preferences, they all feel like you. And that's because they are. Your brain was transplanted into another body. A full experimental procedure. Your original body was destroyed in an accident. Only your brain was saved. It was kept alive, sustained, and surgically connected to this new body. You survived, but are you still you? This is the brain transplant dilemma, a haunting question that fractures identity at its core. If your thoughts, your personality, your memories all travel with the brain, then it feels obvious you are your brain. But that's not how people react. Your partner struggles to touch you. Your voice sounds wrong. The child you raised won't look you in the eye. People avoid you. They say things like, "It's good you're alive," but their faces say something else. You look like someone else's ghost. Philosophers have argued this from both ends. Descartes believed the self was the mind, thinking, reasoning, doubting. The body was machinery, disposable. Your true identity sat behind your eyes, in the private theater of consciousness. If he was right, then your survival is total. You're the same person, just walking in different skin. But embodiment matters more than we think. Your body is not just a container, it's a memory structure. You know how tall you are, how fast you move, what your face looks like in mirrors. You walk into rooms expecting to be perceived a certain way. You read your emotions through heartbeat, posture, gesture. When that changes, something in you breaks. The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty argued that consciousness is shaped by the body's interaction with the world. We don't just think ourselves into identity, we live into it. Our hands are part of how we know things. Our legs, part of how we understand freedom. Our voice, part of how we form thoughts. So when you wake up in a different body, it's not just your appearance that's changed. It's your existence. Now imagine the body you've been placed into once belonged to someone else. A convicted criminal, or a famous athlete, or someone recently deceased whose family recognizes the body but not the brain. Whose name do you carry now? Who owns your memories? Are you the person whose brain survived or the person whose body remains? And what if the transplant was reversed? What if someone else's brain was placed in your original body, and they began walking around, speaking with your voice, hugging your family, living in your home? Would they be you? Or would your body betray them? Remind everyone of who you once were. This is where identity fractures, because we want to believe that who we are is rational, internal, psychological, but we also recognize people by how they look, how they move, how they age. The mind may be you, but the body is how you are known. And if they come apart, so does everything else. Legal systems don't know what to do with you. Your ID no longer matches your face. Your biometric data fails. You're declared medically alive, but socially dead. Your insurance won't cover treatment. It was for the body that's gone. Your marriage certificate is void. Your bank account is locked, because no one can agree on where the person went. Some say you're still alive. Others say you died. And in that confusion, your life becomes something new. A person without a place. Memory erase consent. You sit in the consultation room, reading the contract. It's short, clinical, unambiguous. You will undergo a traumatic experience. The pain will be real. The fear, total. But immediately afterward, the memory will be erased. You will not remember the event, the fear, or the choice to experience either. The procedure is voluntary. The consent is binding. You sign. They guide you to the chamber. Straps hold your limbs down. You're told nothing. Your pulse rises. A simulation begins. You scream, cry, plead. Your body reacts as if it's dying. And then it ends. You wake up in a recovery bed. Groggy, clean, calm. They ask how you feel. You shrug. Fine. You guess. You can't remember why you're here. They hand you a certificate confirming that the procedure was completed successfully. You smile. You joke. You leave. And behind you, you've left a part of yourself that no longer exists. This is the memory erase consent dilemma, an ethical rift in the foundation of what it means to suffer, to consent, to heal, and to be a person at all. If someone agrees to pain and then forgets it, did they suffer? If you can't remember it, did it still happen? Modern ethics is built on the architecture of memory, consent, responsibility, growth, justice. All rely on the idea that we remember what we've done and what has been done to us. But this procedure severs that entirely. It splits the self in two. One self experiences the trauma. The other, the one you return to, inherits the body, but not the pain. Philosopher John Locke argued that personal identity is not found in the body, but in consciousness, specifically in memory. You are, he wrote, the same person as the one who committed a past action only if you remember doing it. Without memory, there is no continuity. You are no longer accountable. But if we follow Locke's logic, then the person who screamed during the simulation, who begged and broke, that person is now dead. Erased, you are something else. Someone else. And yet the suffering happened. Your body remembers. The monitor showed your heartbeat spiking. Your blood flooded with cortisol. Your muscles convulsed. The pain was real, measurable, undeniable, and it changed you, even if you don't know how. You walk out smiling. But the trauma lives somewhere deeper than language. You've chosen a life without the burden of what you endured, but the person who endured it didn't choose to forget. They never consented to be erased. That decision was made before they existed, by someone else, by you. This introduces a paradox. How can someone consent on behalf of a self they will later destroy? Philosopher Thomas Metzinger proposed that the self is not a thing, but a process, a model the brain uses to represent the organism to itself. If that's true, then memory isn't just data. It's structure. Remove it, and the self changes. Consent collapses inward. The person who made the decision vanishes. The one who lives with the aftermath was never there when the choice was made. You can't apologize to them. You can't ask if they still agree. They simply wake up and move forward. Now imagine, this becomes widespread, used in prisons, on soldiers, on abuse survivors. A simple offer, go through this now, and we'll make sure you never remember it. A bureaucratic dream. No long-term psychological care. No trauma claims. No public outcry. No story, only silence. But silence isn't healing, it's disappearance. Philosopher Paul Ricoeur wrote about the ethics of memory, that remembering is not just personal but moral. Memory connects us to the past and binds us to justice. Without it, we lose the ability to witness, to testify, to resist. Erasure is not neutral. It protects systems, not people. And yet, you consented. You wanted this. You signed. You even paid. And now the pain is gone. No guilt, no scars. You carry on, efficient, unburdened, light, but something in you feels thin. Like a story that skips its middle. Like grief that doesn't know what it lost. You are your own ghost. And when someone asks what happened, you'll smile and say, I don't remember. And that will be true. But someone did. And no one ever asked if they wanted to disappear. Eternal recurrence. Imagine this. You die. There is no heaven, no hell, no nothing, except this. You are told, without warning, that you must live your life again, exactly as it was. Every detail, every decision, every mistake, every breath. You are not reborn as someone else. You are reborn as yourself, exactly as you were. And once you finish it, it restarts again and again, forever. You can't change anything. You can only experience it again and again with full awareness. The knowledge builds, but your actions do not change. This is the thought experiment of eternal recurrence, introduced by Friedrich Nietzsche, not as cosmology, but as ethics. The question is not whether it's true. The question is, if this were true, would it change how you live? Nietzsche framed eternal recurrence as the ultimate moral test. Suppose a demon came to you and said, this life, just as you've lived it, you will live again, infinitely. Would you fall to the ground, cursing the heavens? Or would you say, yes, I would live it again? Because if you wouldn't, what does that say about how you're living now? This is not the threat of divine punishment. There is no final judgment, no afterlife, just repetition. The weight of having to carry your own life, exactly as it is, forever. Every lie, every kindness, every cruelty, every moment you looked away, every time you stayed silent. You are not judged by a God. You are judged by yourself, repeated eternally. And this makes the question sharper. If you knew your life would loop forever, are you morally obligated to make it worth reliving? Many ethical systems begin with consequence. Utilitarianism measures outcomes. Kantian ethics measures intention. But eternal recurrence changes the metric. You don't ask, did this action help others? You ask, can I bear to live this action again infinitely? Suddenly, your worst habits aren't private anymore. They're immortal. Your moments of laziness, cruelty, self-pity, they don't fade into the past. They become permanent architecture. The house you now live in, forever. This isn't about shame. It's about endurance. Can you endure yourself on an endless loop? Of course, most people don't believe in eternal recurrence, but the question still holds. What if your life were a closed system? What if there were no fresh starts, no clean slates, just deeper returns to the same moments, magnified by repetition? Would you still waste time? Would you still treat strangers the way you do? Would you still make the same compromises, over and over, knowing you'd have to live with them not once, but endlessly? Nietzsche saw eternal recurrence as an antidote to nihilism, the belief that nothing matters. If you say nothing matters because it will all end, you're dodging responsibility. But if everything matters because it never ends, then every action becomes sacred. You either embrace your life completely, or you don't. But this leads to a disturbing implication. If you don't love your life enough to relive it, then maybe you've already failed. Maybe the deepest ethical failure isn't doing wrong. Maybe it's building a life you wouldn't even choose to inhabit a second time. And if you can't face that, not once but endlessly, then what exactly are you living for? Not improvement, not reward, not forgiveness. Just the unbreakable return of you. Virtual Murder says, kill in VR with real emotional pain. In the virtual world, you can do anything. You can build cities, travel back in time, live in someone else's skin. And if you want, you can kill someone, brutally, vividly, and walk away with no consequences. The victim doesn't die in real life. They remove their headset. They go home. But inside the simulation, they screamed. They begged. They cried when you put the gun to their head and pulled the trigger. You didn't hurt their body, but you hurt something. This is the virtual murder dilemma, the question of whether simulated violence, when felt by real minds, can be ethically indistinguishable from violence in the real world. Once it was just a game. Now it's a system of sensory feedback, emotional realism, and full immersion neural interfaces. In VR, people feel, they register pain, fear, violation, not just as pixels, but as lived experience. The software bypasses the eyes. It taps the brain. What you do to someone in there is remembered out here. You might say, it's just a simulation. It's not real. But philosopher Robert Nozick's experience machine thought experiment warns against dismissing artificial experience. If you can feel love, joy, pain inside a machine, then the machine is real, at least psychologically. Your body may be safe. Your mind is not. So what happens when you inflict suffering in that space? You didn't commit a crime. You didn't break a bone. But the person you attack now has trauma from something that didn't happen. They flinch when they hear your voice. They log out for weeks. They need therapy for something the law doesn't even recognize. You say, I didn't touch them, but you did. You touched the self. In ethics, this raises a shift from material harm to phenomenological harm, not damage to the body, but to conscious experience. As virtual systems grow more immersive, we are no longer protected by the unreality of the medium. Pain becomes portable. Philosopher J.S. Mill defined harm as the violation of another's freedom and well-being. If someone suffers in VR, if their autonomy is violated, their consent erased, their emotions hijacked, then harm has occurred, even if the world itself is digital. But if harm can occur in a fake world, then what is the ethical boundary between simulation and reality? Imagine a man who kills his wife in VR over and over because he says it helps with his anger. He never harms her in real life. But in the virtual space, he chooses violence. He says it's therapeutic. She says it feels like dying. What do we do with that? You might argue we must protect freedom of imagination, that if we censor thoughts, even violent ones, we're engaging in moral authoritarianism. But what if your imagination damages someone else's mind? At what point does private fantasy become public cruelty? Philosopher Immanuel Kant would say that treating someone as a tool for your pleasure, even in simulation, violates their dignity. Even if the environment is unreal, the moral relation is not. You used them. You treated their personhood as a stage. Now imagine this at scale. 10,000 people log in to hurt others. Some pay for the experience. Others volunteer for money, for masochism, for reasons they don't understand. The line between victim and participant blurs. But the outcome is the same. People leave the system changed, not in body. In psyche, the legal system can't prosecute it, but philosophy asks a different question. What kind of person chooses to kill when the cost is nothing? And if you practice cruelty even in games, what are you training yourself to become? Maybe the harm isn't just what you did to someone else. Maybe it's what you did to yourself. Because you didn't just simulate murder. You made it easy. You made it normal. You made it fun. And you did it to someone who will remember it for the rest of their life, even if their body was never touched. The locked-in patient. You're in a hospital bed. You can see, you can hear, you feel time pass, but no one knows you're still alive inside. Your eyelids don't move. Your mouth doesn't work. You can't twitch a finger. The machines say your brain activity is low. Doctors think you're unconscious. Nurses talk over you like you're furniture. Family members say goodbye. But you're still here. You are a locked-in patient, conscious but completely paralyzed, unable to communicate or move. You're awake, and you might remain that way, indefinitely. Eventually, a question arises: should they end your life? This is the locked-in dilemma. one of the most disturbing questions in bioethics and philosophy of mind. When consciousness is trapped without expression, how do we define suffering? And who has the right to end it? This isn't hypothetical. Cases like Jean-Dominique Bauby, the editor of Elle magazine, who suffered a massive stroke and became fully paralyzed, are real. He dictated an entire memoir, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, by blinking one eye. Others aren't so lucky. Some remain locked in for years, decades, with no way to prove they're still thinking. And when a patient is silent, medicine assumes absence. But consciousness doesn't require speech. Descartes claimed, "I think, therefore I am." But what if you think, and no one believes you exist? This brings us to a critical problem in ethics. What justifies euthanasia when consent cannot be verified? In most moral frameworks, autonomy is sacred. A person may choose to die if their suffering is intolerable, and they retain the cognitive capacity to understand that choice. But locked-in patients often cannot express that choice. So the question becomes, can others decide for them? Suppose doctors determine you have no chance of recovery. Family members see your body deteriorating, and they say, they wouldn't want this. Is that enough? You might have signed a document years earlier. Do not resuscitate if I'm in a vegetative state. But are you vegetative? Or are you just unheard? Philosopher Peter Singer, a utilitarian, has argued that life loses its moral priority when it no longer contains preference, experience, or possibility. If the person can no longer formulate or act on desires, then preserving life may no longer be valuable, especially if suffering dominates the experience. But what if suffering isn't provable? What if the patient is enduring? What if, inside their frozen body, they are imagining stories, remembering poetry, doing math problems in their head? Bauby described his mind as a butterfly, fluttering even as his body remains sealed in a diving bell. If you euthanize such a person, have you committed murder by misdiagnosis? There's also the inverse problem. Suppose a locked-in patient can communicate, barely, maybe through a single muscle spasm or a slight dilation of the pupil, and through painstaking methods, they communicate, "Please let me die." Do you honor the request, or do you doubt it? What if the message was misunderstood? What if they were confused? What if the one moment they spoke was a moment of despair and they changed their mind but can never say so again? Philosopher Ronald Dworkin distinguished between precedent autonomy, the wishes you made while healthy, and current welfare, your moment-to-moment experience now. If you once said, "I would never want to live like that," but are now emotionally stable, should your old wish still count? But in the locked-in condition, you have no way to clarify. You are a ghost in a functioning machine. Now imagine this becomes technological. Brain-computer interfaces begin to detect intent from neural signals. Machines speak for you, interpret your mood, reconstruct your preferences from old writing. Algorithms estimate your quality of life. Do we trust that? Do we let machines decide if you're still in there? Or do we require old-fashioned certainty, speech, signature, spoken consent, even when we know the brain might be active? There is no resolution here that doesn't carry ethical risk. Wait too long, and you risk trapping someone in silent torment for years. Act too soon, and you risk ending the life of someone who might still have found meaning, even inside the horror. And, worst of all, you'll never know which one you chose. Because by the time you make the decision, the only person who could tell you is already gone. Punish the innocent. A man has been murdered. The town is furious. Tension spills into the streets. Crowds form. Windows break. Businesses close early. Police are overwhelmed. The mayor receives a warning. If no one is held accountable by morning, the riot will begin and people will die. But the investigation has stalled. No leads, no suspect, no time. Then someone comes forward, not the killer, just someone unpopular. A drifter, a former felon. Someone people already distrust. He didn't do it. But if you frame him, plant the evidence, spin the story, push it through the courts, the city will believe justice was served. And the riot will end. The question is simple. Do you punish an innocent person to prevent a larger evil? This is the punish the innocent dilemma, the kind of problem philosophers pose, not because they want to, but because the real world already has. It's a challenge to our belief in justice, and whether justice still matters when lives are on the line. Utilitarians have a clear answer. John Stuart Mill argued that the morality of an action depends on its consequences. If punishing one person saves many others, if it prevents chaos, loss of life, and civic collapse, then yes, it's the ethical choice. One life sacrificed to save hundreds. The math works. But morality is not only about math. For Kant, consequences are irrelevant. What matters is the principle behind your action. If you punish an innocent person, you're using them as a tool, a prop in a performance. You are not respecting their humanity, only their usefulness. And that, he says, is morally forbidden. Even if it works, even if everyone is safer, it's still wrong. But imagine the faces of the people whose lives you might save. The shop owner boarding up his business, the family praying that no fires are set, the elderly man who won't survive if the power grid fails. Can you justify protecting a single innocent man over the certainty of widespread suffering? Is that moral courage or moral cowardice? Real history has already tested this. During times of war, political regimes have routinely blamed the innocent to maintain stability. Propaganda finds a scapegoat. Executions are staged to show the people that anything is being done. We tell ourselves those were barbaric acts of tyrants. But when the alternative is disorder, even democracies hesitate. Philosopher Bernard Williams argued that utilitarianism fails because it demands too much of moral agents. It tells you to ignore your personal commitments, your instincts, even your sense of justice, if the numbers point another way. But people aren't spreadsheets. We live in stories, and no good story ends with, "We punished the wrong man, but it helped." Yet, in this story, the innocent man knows the stakes. You tell him everything. He can walk free, or he can give himself up and prevent the deaths of dozens. He thinks, and then he says, "I'll do it. I'll be your scapegoat."
Now what?
If he consents to punishment, knowing he didn't commit the crime, does it become ethical? Or is this still injustice, dressed in martyrdom? Jean-Paul Sartre might say this is freedom in its purest form, choosing your own meaning in the face of absurdity. But Hannah Arendt would warn that once truth is abandoned, once innocence becomes optional, society has already begun to rot. Because it won't stop here. If people learn that justice means whatever prevents unrest, then justice becomes negotiation, not principle, not truth, just strategy. And one day, the same logic will turn back on you. You'll be the one they need to silence, sacrifice, or erase for the good of the whole. And someone else will say, "We had no choice. It was the moral thing to do." And you'll realize, far too late, that the riot never needed to happen. It just needed someone to blame. Execution for deterrence. A prisoner is led to the gallows. The crime, theft, committed in a time of desperation. He wasn't violent, he didn't hurt anyone. And privately, even the judge admits, the man doesn't deserve to die. But the law is clear. Public theft is spreading. Order is breaking down. Merchants are hiring private guards. The city is teetering. The execution is staged in the square, midday, with crowds watching. A warning, not a verdict. It's not about what this man did. It's about what others might do next. This is the execution for deterrence dilemma, a moral crisis at the center of legal philosophy. Can we justify killing a human being, not because they deserve it, but because it might frighten others into obedience? It feels barbaric, medieval, but it's not just history, it's policy. Even today, capital punishment is often defended not by retribution, but by deterrence. The argument is cold. Some crimes are so dangerous that only the threat of death will stop people from committing them. If a few executions prevent hundreds of murders, isn't that worth it? That's the utilitarian case. Philosopher Jeremy Bentham, founder of utilitarianism, believed punishment was only morally justified when it produced more good than harm. If capital punishment prevents greater violence, then it is not merely allowed, it is morally obligatory. The goal isn't vengeance, it's stability, safety, prevention. But this logic only works if the threat of execution actually works. And it's not clear it does. Studies across countries show little to no evidence that the death penalty reduces crime more effectively than long-term imprisonment. In fact, in places where executions are public and brutal, crime often increases, fueled by poverty, desperation, or retaliation. So we kill, for the sake of an effect that may never come. And now we return to ethics. Suppose deterrence works. Suppose executing this man stops 100 future crimes. People see the body hanging. They reconsider their actions. Lives are saved. Is it now ethical? The Kantian response is immediate and unyielding. No. For Immanuel Kant, human beings must always be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means. You cannot kill someone just to manipulate others' behavior. Even if the person is guilty, the reason for their death must be tied to what they did, not what others might do. Otherwise, you're not punishing a crime. You're making a sacrifice. This turns the justice system into theater, a stage for fear, and the person being executed becomes a tool, not a subject. That's the first fracture. Now go further. What if the person you execute is not guilty of a capital crime? Suppose he stole medicine. Suppose he broke into a warehouse to feed his family. But the government decides, he's the example we need. His death will make the rest afraid. You've now created a system that doesn't punish guilt. It punishes symbolism. Philosopher Michel Foucault, in Discipline and Punish, described how power structures use punishment not to correct behavior, but to assert control. The execution isn't about justice, it's about visibility. Fear, a body on display to remind the masses who is in charge. When a society does this, it no longer has a justice system. It has a performance. But what if it works? That's always the question. What if killing one truly does stop the rest? What if a single execution prevents a civil war? You didn't murder him for hate. You didn't enjoy it. You did it rationally. You calculated the good. You accepted the cost. But you made one choice you can never reverse. You decided someone's life was a tool, not because they threatened you, not because they couldn't be stopped, but because others were watching. And that's when justice dies, not with a bang, but with a shrug. Because once you agree to kill for deterrence, you've admitted something no democracy should ever admit. That some people exist not as citizens, but as warnings, and that fear is more important than fairness. That results matter more than rights. And once you believe that, you can justify anything and anyone, as long as they hang in public. Abusive hero. He walks into the operating room and saves a life. Then he goes home and screams at his wife. He cuts out tumors with perfect hands, and then uses those same hands to slam a door, grab a wrist, shatter silence. Everyone at the hospital calls him a miracle worker. Everyone at home walks on eggshells. And the question is whispered, behind closed doors, under breath, can a man be a hero in public and a monster in private? This is the abusive hero dilemma, the ethical fracture between personal virtue and professional greatness. What do we do when someone who does enormous good also causes private harm? It's not just theoretical. Doctors, teachers, celebrities, priests, revolutionaries. History is filled with people whose public contributions changed the world and whose private lives left people broken. Do we judge the work by the person, or the person by the work? Start with the utilitarian answer. Jeremy Bentham would say the moral weight of a person lies in their outcomes. If this man saves 300 lives, then even if he ruins 3, the balance sheet leans toward good. The total happiness increases. He should be celebrated. But something feels wrong. You imagine standing in the operating room, clapping as he removes a tumor, while his child watches from the hallway, flinching at every raised voice. And the applause starts to sound like complicity. Immanuel Kant would argue that morality is not about outcomes, it's about principles. A person who violates the moral law in one domain cannot be excused because they follow it in another. You can't compensate for cruelty with skill. If you treat someone as a means to vent your anger, to assert dominance, you've already failed the test of dignity. So even if he saves lives, his moral worth is not secure. Now consider the hospital. They know, or at least they suspect. Do they fire him? Transfer him? Ignore it? What if the abuse hasn't been reported formally? What if the victims stay silent, scared, exhausted, unsure they'll be believed? What if firing him means patients die? Now the institution itself enters the moral dilemma. Keep him, and you protect patients. Remove him, and you protect the principle. But at what cost? Philosopher Hannah Arendt warned against bureaucratic ethics, systems that allow individuals to excuse inaction because it's not my job to judge. When everyone waits for someone else to act, abusers are protected by the fog of responsibility. And that's what happens here. The hospital says, we can't interfere in his private life. The family says, we can't speak up. He's respected, powerful, untouchable. The victims say, he saves lives, who would believe us? And no one acts. Because greatness buys silence. Now flip the perspective. Suppose the abuse is reported. It's proven. The hospital fires him. He loses his license, and weeks later, a patient dies on the table because no one else could do the surgery. Was it worth it? This is where the dilemma reaches its peak. Do we protect outcomes, or do we uphold moral structure? Philosopher Susan Wolf explored the idea of moral saints, people who are entirely good, at all costs. But she warned that such people may be unbearable. Not every moral decision creates good lives. Sometimes it destroys excellence, beauty, skill, because those things can come from complicated people. Do we want a world with only safe people, if that world comes with fewer miracles? Or do we accept complexity and risk turning a blind eye to suffering? There is no clean answer. Only a choice. Do you honor the man who saves lives? Or do you believe the woman who says, he saves strangers, but I live with what he is? And if you believe both, what do you do next? Designer Baby Dilemma. Choose your child's traits. You're in a clinic. A technician shows you a screen. On it are 5 viable embryos, your future children, not hypothetical. Real, fertilized, waiting to be implanted. Each one comes with a profile. Projected height, likelihood of depression, risk of diabetes, personality traits, cognitive scores, estimated physical attractiveness. You can choose not to kill, not to enhance, just to select. You're told, we won't add anything unnatural, we just let you choose the best version of your own genetic possibilities. So now you're not just becoming a parent, you're becoming a curator. This is the designer baby dilemma, the moment when reproduction stops being chance and becomes a decision. It begins with health. Choose the embryo least likely to inherit disease. Few argue with that. No one wants to watch their child suffer. It's framed as compassion. But then it shifts. You choose against depression, then low intelligence, then short stature, then traits loosely correlated with lower income, lower status, lower potential. And soon, the line between protection and prejudice disappears. What begins as prevention becomes preference. You didn't reject someone for being sick. You rejected someone for being less. Bioethicists call this liberal eugenics, not state-mandated, not violent, not coercive, just quiet optimization, one embryo at a time, market-driven, private, but with consequences that reshape what counts as normal. And that's the deeper fracture. Because the child you select doesn't know they were chosen. But they will grow up in a world where people ask, why didn't your parents fix that? Why didn't they choose the smarter version? The taller one? The one without mood swings? The burden of imperfection will become the fault of the parent. And slowly the idea that every life is equally worthy collapses. You're no longer defending people with disabilities. You're deleting them in advance, not out of hatred, out of convenience. You can say, it's just selection, but it's not. It's a system where only the most optimized versions of humans are given a chance to exist. We used to believe that people are born, and we learn to love them. Now we select the ones we're more likely to love. And what happens when gene editing is added to the mix? When parents don't just choose, but design? Do we really believe we'll stop at disease, or will we move to confidence, ambition, skin tone, facial structure? All of it will be voluntary, and all of it will be normalized. Until one day, a child with bad eyesight and crooked teeth walks into a school. And everyone quietly wonders, why would anyone let that happen? And in that moment, compassion ends, and quality control begins. Death by jury vote. A man is on trial for murder. The evidence is overwhelming. There's no reasonable doubt. The law allows capital punishment, but it doesn't mandate it. The final decision is handed to the jury. Not guilt, not innocence. Life or death. 12 strangers. Ordinary people. They sell shoes, teach school, drive buses. None are philosophers. None are judges. But today they decide whether another human being will keep breathing. And the vote must be unanimous. This is the death by jury vote dilemma. The ethical collision between democratic justice and the weight of moral finality. Can a society that claims to value life outsource the most irreversible decision to a dozen citizens, chosen not for their wisdom, but for their availability? Start with the premise. We ask ordinary people to decide extraordinary things. Because democracy believes in representation, that justice should not be handed down from elites, but expressed through the moral judgment of the community. That's the argument for capital punishment by jury. It's not a judge. It's not the state. It's us. If society deems an act so severe that it deserves death, it should be society, not a machine, not a statute, that delivers that verdict. It feels like fairness. But philosopher John Rawls would ask a deeper question. Would you design this system if you didn't know which side of it you'd be on? Behind Rawls' famous veil of ignorance, you don't know if you'll be the juror or the defendant. You don't know if the jury will be thoughtful or vindictive, fair or exhausted. Do you still design a system where life and death hangs on 12 people's mood, fear, or fatigue? The answer should terrify you. Because real juries are flawed. They get distracted, they bring biases, they're influenced by emotion, rhetoric, and groupthink. And yet they decide whether someone lives. Philosopher Hannah Arendt, reflecting on the banality of evil, warned how ordinary people acting within systems can commit or permit atrocities without malice. The problem isn't monsters. The problem is procedure. A jury isn't 12 executioners. It's 12 citizens following instructions. The ritual feels clean, but the outcome is death. Now look at the other side. Suppose you abolish death by jury vote. The state still executes people, but now it's a judge, or a governor, or a faceless legal system. Is that better? Who's more accountable, a single official or 12 peers? This is where Jean-Jacques Rousseau offers a darker twist. Rousseau argued that punishment, when enacted by the general will, is not violence. It is the people punishing themselves, maintaining the moral contract. In this view, jury votes for death aren't about blame. They're about renewing the social order. But what if the social order is sick? What if the community's will is shaped by fear, racism, rage? Now death becomes democracy's shadow, a ritual of cleansing disguised as justice. And once you allow that, how many other decisions become moral performances? There's also the question of conscience. Suppose 11 jurors vote for life. One juror, disturbed by the crime, insists on death. There's no deliberation left. They vote. The result, death. Is this justice? Or is this moral roulette? Philosopher Albert Camus, a lifelong critic of the death penalty, argued that capital punishment is never just a pastèque, not because criminals don't deserve to die, but because no human institution deserves the moral authority to kill. To kill someone in cold blood with ceremony is not justice. It's theater. And jurors are the audience and the actors. They're told it's a civic duty, but they will carry that vote for the rest of their lives. Some never speak of it again. Others unravel slowly. The burden of conscience is not hypothetical. It's distributed execution. And in that system, no one is guilty because everyone shares it. You didn't pull the lever. You just raised your hand. And somewhere a body falls. And the system moves on. Clean. Keys. Legal. But if that man was innocent, even once, then everyone in the room becomes part of the lie. And the sentence doesn't end with him. It begins with you. Suicide bomb versus drone strike. One is messy, desperate, and close. A man walks into a crowd with explosives strapped to his chest. He sees the eyes of the people he's about to kill. He feels the heat of the blast. His body is torn apart with theirs. The other is clean, remote, and sanctioned. A drone operator sits in an air-conditioned trailer thousands of kilometers away. He clicks a button. A missile vaporizes a vehicle. Target confirmed. Collateral damage. 3 civilians. He drives home, has dinner with his family, and sleeps. And the question is this: which is worse? This is the drone versus suicide bomb dilemma, a confrontation between two forms of modern violence. One personal, one procedural, one condemned, one defended. Both kill, but only one is called terrorism. Let's begin with consequences. If you count only the bodies, the answer varies. Drone strikes may be more precise, but they are not bloodless. Between 2004 and 2020, U.S. drone programs killed thousands, many of them civilians. The suicide bomber, by contrast, rarely escapes condemnation. He is framed as irrational, monstrous, religiously possessed. The drone operator is framed as professional, but the dead are just as gone. So what's the ethical difference? Utilitarianism judges actions by their outcomes. If the drone strike kills fewer people overall, if it avoids a ground war, if it eliminates a high-value target, then it is morally superior. Clean, efficient, rational. But philosopher Michael Walzer, writing in Just and Unjust Wars, warned against this cold calculus. He asked whether wars fought with minimal risk to the attacker could still be morally just. If you never risk yourself, if you kill from above, from distance, from safety, do you maintain the moral courage to distinguish war from execution? Now consider intent. The suicide bomber intends to die. He believes in a cause or a reward or a revenge. His violence is personal, up close, archaic. He watches the faces of those he kills. He cannot deny what he's doing. The drone operator, by contrast, may not know their target personally, may not see the child who runs into frame at the last second, may not know if the signature pattern is accurate. Which one is more ethically responsible? Philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that moral action is defined by intent and by whether we treat others as ends in themselves. If the drone strike is launched, knowing innocent lives will be lost, even as collateral, then those lives have been used, sacrificed without consent, reduced to acceptable risk. In this view, the method doesn't absolve the act. In fact, it may make it worse. Because unlike the suicide bomber who owns his action in blood and belief, the drone operator might feel nothing. This brings us to a deeper problem: psychological distance. Albert Camus once wrote that the more abstract violence becomes, the more dangerous it gets, because we no longer feel responsible. The drone strike is too clean. It allows us to kill without confronting the humanity of the killed. It separates action from consequence, and that's the darkest part, because it means the suicide bomber is closer to us, morally. He's wrong, he's horrific, but he owns his violence. The drone operator, he gets to pretend he's just doing a job. Now consider law. One is illegal under nearly every global standard, the other is state-sanctioned. The suicide bomber is called a terrorist. The drone strike is called foreign policy. But what is law when it justifies one form of murder while criminalizing another, not based on method or body count, but on who authorizes it? Philosopher Judith Butler wrote that the value of a life is often determined by its grievability, whether society believes it's worth mourning. A drone strike kills militants, a suicide bomber kills innocents, but in both cases civilians die, and in both cases someone somewhere decided those lives were worth less. So ask yourself, is the drone strike more ethical because the killer sleeps in his own bed? Because he doesn't hear the screams? Because he has a badge? Or is that the real horror? That we've designed violence so distant, so professional, that it feels like nothing at all. And if killing starts to feel like nothing, then ethics isn't just dead, it's been automated. Forgiveness versus safety. He served 20 years. He stabbed a man during a robbery, said it wasn't planned, said he was high, said he blacked out. In prison he studied, got sober, led restorative justice workshops. He apologized, met with the victim's family, wrote letters, cried on the floor. The parole board says he's no longer a threat, and now he's moving back into your neighborhood. He'll live 2 blocks away, shop at your store. His child will attend your child's school. You've read his case, you've seen the photos, and now someone asks you, can you forgive him? Should society forgive him? This is the forgiveness versus safety dilemma, a test of whether we can ever truly reintegrate those who've committed grave violence, and whether forgiveness is an act of moral progress or moral negligence. Start with the emotional appeal. We believe in second chances, that people can change, that human beings are not frozen in their worst moment. Philosophers like Hannah Arendt argue that forgiveness is what separates moral action from revenge. That to forgive is not to forget, but to resist the temptation to write someone off forever. In Arendt's view, forgiveness is political. It's how we live together after rupture. But what if the rupture involved blood? What if the victim never recovered? What if the widow never forgave? What if the child who lost their parent never moved on? Do you have the right to forgive what wasn't done to you? This is where Emmanuel Levinas enters. He warned against abstract forgiveness, the kind that happens in theory or policy. Forgiveness, he said, must always come from the victim. No one else can authorize it. It is a singular, personal, untransferable act. So if you weren't harmed, you don't forgive. You only tolerate. But even tolerance has limits. Suppose he reoffends. Not immediately. Maybe years later. Another knife. Another victim. And this time the headline reads, "Repeat offender was released early after claims of reform." Now forgiveness looks like a gamble. And everyone who gave it looks guilty. Philosopher Derek Parfit explored the idea of identity over time. If the man who committed the crime no longer exists, if the self has changed, are we punishing the right person by keeping him locked out of society? But Parfit's insight cuts both ways. If he's truly a new person, then the old crime no longer applies. But if that's true, then so does the forgiveness. Because you're not forgiving him anymore. You're forgiving a stranger for someone else's act. And that makes forgiveness meaningless. Now consider the inverse. Suppose he never reoffends, lives quietly, becomes a teacher, helps others avoid the mistakes he made. And yet, for decades, no one forgets. He is always that guy. The murderer. The man who got away with it. His children are bullied. His home is vandalized. He's not legally punished anymore. But socially, the sentence never ended. This exposes a deeper fracture. Do we want redemption, or do we want containment? Nietzsche warned of a morality of resentment, where society invents bad people to reaffirm its own goodness. Once someone is labeled evil, their continued suffering becomes a moral resource for others. Forgiveness, then, isn't denied because they're dangerous. It's denied because their guilt is useful. It helps others feel safe, or righteous, or untainted. So we create rituals of rehabilitation. We say, people can change, but we don't mean it, because if they do change, we lose someone to blame. And that may be the real cost of forgiveness. It doesn't just restore the offender, it dismantles the boundary between us and them. It forces us to admit that good and evil are not separate categories. That we too could become the thing we fear, if we had their life, their rage, their moment. And that's a truth most people don't want to live beside. So instead, they say, he served his time, but not here, not near me, not near my family. Forgiveness in theory, exile in practice. And the question becomes, do we forgive people to heal society, or only to feel like we tried? The mouse button. Now ask the deeper question, is a mouse's life worth $1? Utilitarians might say, probably not. The pleasure of gaining $1 may outweigh the suffering of a creature with limited intelligence. Mice don't anticipate death the way humans do. They don't write poetry, they don't file lawsuits. But they do suffer, they bond, they express fear and empathy. Neurologically, they're closer to us than we want to admit. So what if we raise the price? $10 per press, 101,000. What if you had to look the mouse in the eyes first? What if you had to hear it squeal? At what point does your moral instinct override the reward? This is what philosopher Peter Singer calls the expanding circle. The idea that moral concern begins with ourselves, then our family, then our tribe, and gradually expands outward to strangers, animals, future generations. But that expansion isn't automatic, it's resisted. It requires imagination. And modern life discourages imagination. It rewards abstraction, distance. It turns ethical costs into invisible systems. You don't see the slaughterhouse. You don't see the sweatshop. You don't see the ecological collapse caused by your plastic bottle. You just get the product. In this sense, the button is honest. It exposes the truth. Most people are willing to accept death if it's small enough, distant enough, and rewarded well enough. And that's what makes it terrifying. Because what if we scale it? One cow for $20, one chimpanzee for $5,000, one anonymous prisoner for $1 million. What if the trade-off shifts from life to freedom? Would you press a button to shorten your commute if it meant someone else lost access to clean water? Would you press it for convenience? Knowing a species moves one step closer to extinction, you already do. You just don't see the button. And that's why the mouse matters. Because it's the first step, the first life you're asked to value, not because it's smart or useful or human, but because it's alive. And if you can't stop yourself at a mouse, what makes you think you'll stop at anything at all? Poacher's child. Kill an elephant to feed starving children. You're standing in the brush of a game reserve. Before you is an elephant, matriarch of her herd, wise, slow, ancient. Her tusks are massive, enough to feed a black market dealer for months. A poacher is crouched in the bush. His finger is on the trigger, but he doesn't pull it for sport, not for money to buy a car or a new phone. He pulls it to feed his children. Not metaphorically. Literally. They are starving. He sold everything else. Clothes, tools, dignity. The elephant's ivory is the last resource left. It will buy grain, water, a roof. If he doesn't kill, they don't eat. And now the question isn't about conservation. It's about who dies first, the elephant or the child. This is the poacher's child dilemma, the collision between moral outrage and economic reality. We claim to value life, to protect the innocent, to oppose extinction. But what happens when one life must die to keep another breathing? The elephant isn't just an animal. It's a symbol of wisdom, of memory, of everything majestic and endangered. But the child isn't a symbol. He's just hungry. So what now? You can moralize from afar. You can write op-eds, fund documentaries, donate to wildlife foundations. But you're not standing there. You're not deciding whether your son eats tonight. He is. And suddenly, every high-minded value starts to decay. Because for him, the elephant isn't a majestic being. It's a commodity with a pulse. It walks. It breathes. but mostly it's made of money. The Western world criminalizes the act, labels it evil. Poaching is portrayed as senseless violence, as greed. But when that label hits a man with 3 children and no food, it becomes absurd. He's not choosing evil. He's choosing survival. And this is where every ethical theory begins to crack. You can talk about intrinsic value, that some beings like elephants are irreplaceable, that ecosystems depend on them, that once gone they don't return. You can talk about utilitarianism, that one elephant's death leads to many long-term harms, that encouraging poaching fuels corruption, extinction, ecological collapse. But utilitarianism becomes meaningless when the scale collapses to one person's kitchen, when the many become your family, when the suffering is not hypothetical, not statistical, but gnawing, daily, real. And this isn't new. Colonial powers once stripped entire regions of their wildlife, then returned to declare the animals sacred, created laws to protect what they had already stolen, built parks to fence in what used to be free, then told the people living beside those fences they couldn't eat. So now the elephant is protected, and the child is not. That's the hidden calculus. We've made it easier to mourn a dead elephant than a starving boy. But ask yourself, if you had to pull the trigger, would you? If saving a creature of intelligence and memory meant condemning a human child to months of hunger, maybe death, would your ethics survive the test? Or would you find the safety switch, steady your hand, and shoot anyway? The elephant falls. And suddenly, you're not an activist. You're a parent. But then it gets worse. Because now the act has happened. The ivory is sold. The child is fed. But what about next time? You've taught your child that death can be traded for life, that violence works, that empathy ends at the edge of desperation. And maybe you've doomed the herd. So you look at your full belly and the empty clearing, and you wonder, what's worse, starving to death or eating on the back of something that never even saw it coming? The last B, save the bee or save the child. You're holding a vial. Inside, enough for one life. A child is dying on a hospital bed, heart failure, barely conscious, no other treatment options. Across the room, in a sealed container, is a bee. The last of its kind. Not endangered. Extinct, -1. The vial can only go to one. You decide. If the child lives, the bee dies. If the bee lives, the child dies. The child is a person. You could talk to him last week. He knew what the stars were. He liked robots. His mother is sitting outside. She's been awake for 2 days. The bee is not a person, but it's the final member of a species that made human agriculture possible. Without bees, crop failure spreads. Ecosystems collapse in chain reactions, not instantly, not theatrically, but irreversibly. You know this. Everyone knows this. And yet the question remains, do you let a human die to save an insect? It sounds absurd, because our instincts weren't built for this kind of trade. Our instincts protect what we recognize. A child is someone. A bee is something. So you give the vial to the child, and the consequences begin. Pollination crashes. Food scarcity rises. In 20 years, another child dies, not in a hospital, but in a riot over grain. Then another, and another. The scale grows. Slowly at first, then it doesn't. What you thought was a decision between 2 lives was between a death and an extinction. But that doesn't change what you did. You didn't make the wrong call. You made the human one, the one that saves what's near. The one that values individual suffering over long-term collapse. The one that has always worked until it doesn't. Because this isn't about bees. It's about every slow emergency we ignore until it becomes unfixable. Climate, biodiversity, soil, oceans. Each warning dismissed for something closer, more personal, more real. It never feels like the end of the world when it starts. Just a small compromise. One bee. One vial, one child, but there's always another child, and never another bee. Euthanasia without consent, terminal but unconscious. There's no blinking, no reflex, no trace of awareness. The EEG is flat. The CT scan shows brain tissue liquefying. The doctors call it persistent vegetative state, persistent, not temporary. No meaningful response for weeks. Minimal brainstem function. Eyes open but not seeing. Body warm but not alive in the way we usually mean. No will, no voice, no consent. And yet she breathes artificially. Blood is oxygenated. Muscles twitch on schedule. Machines simulate life. The body survives. Now you're asked to decide, is there still a person here? And if not, do you turn off the machine? At first glance, this looks like a question about medicine. But it's not. It's about identity. The legal name on the chart doesn't tell you if she's still a person. The machines don't know either. They only track function. They don't ask if function has meaning. And this is where the entire concept of personhood begins to collapse. Some traditions, especially religious, tie personhood to the body. As long as the body functions, the life continues. Killing that body, even if the mind is gone, is still ending a human life. Others ground personhood in consciousness. In this model, a person is their mind, their memories, desires, the ability to reflect, and if that's gone, what's left is not someone, but something. The body becomes evidence of absence. Here's the fracture. The law, the hospital, the insurance company. They treat her as alive. But from a metaphysical perspective, she may have ceased to exist weeks ago. So the dilemma becomes this. Do you protect the form of life or its content? There's no living will, no written refusal of life support. That means her autonomy is out of reach. The very principle that gives meaning to euthanasia, informed consent, is missing. You're left with silence and machines that refuse to stop. Some ethicists argue we must default to preservation, err on the side of life. That sounds safe until you realize what life means here. Electrical impulses simulating function in a brain that no longer processes the world. It's not life. It's an imitation. Others invoke substituted judgment, act as the patient would have chosen based on their values. But values are complex, often undocumented, and people lie to themselves about death. If someone said in good health may not survive the pressure of real decline. And here's the deeper philosophical wound. What if there's no right answer because the subject is already gone? Derek Parfit once suggested that personal identity might be a fiction, that we are not singular selves, but bundles of continuity. When memory, emotion, and awareness dissolve, the person disappears. The body continues, but there's no one home. If you accept this, then ending life support is not ending a person's life. It's cleaning up after the exit. But if you're wrong, then you just killed someone who couldn't object. And now Kant enters, not by name, but by principle. The horror of treating someone as a mere means, even in silence, ending a life they might have valued. Dismissing their dignity in the name of practicality. What looks like mercy might be moral betrayal. Now complicate it further. Suppose this isn't the first case. Suppose the hospital has 20 such patients. Long-term care is draining resources. Children's oncology is underfunded. Beds are full. Doctors are leaving. Keeping her alive isn't just indecision. It's crowding out others who could survive. And now we move from metaphysics to distributive ethics. The cost of preserving a life without content may be the death of lives with potential. You're not preserving dignity, you're hoarding suffering. But people don't want to hear that. Because death by action feels worse than death by neglect, even when neglect causes more harm. So the machines keep running. Not because they serve the patient, but because they protect the people too afraid to stop them. And that's what this dilemma reveals. That death isn't the ethical problem. Prolonging the illusion of life is. And the longer we do it, the less certain we are that we even remember what life meant. Ban all lies. Imagine a world where lying is impossible. Not just illegal, impossible. Every attempt to deceive, mislead, exaggerate, or withhold is blocked at the source. Your brain forms the sentence, but if it's false, it dies on your tongue. No lies, no omissions, no half-truths, no spin. You tell your boss exactly what you think of their competence. Your partner hears every stray attraction, every secret, every doubt. Your child asks, will everything be okay? And you can't lie. Would this be a more ethical world, or a more inhuman one? This is the ban all lies dilemma, not about whether lying is bad, but whether truth enforced universally would actually make society more just or more brutal. Start with the simple case. The malicious lie, fraud, manipulation, betrayal. These dissolve immediately. No Ponzi schemes, no fake alibis, no secret corruption. Justice becomes easier. Trust becomes the norm. Markets stabilize. Courts clear. Relationships purify. But then the knife turns. Because most lies aren't grand deceptions. They're social glue. You look great. I'm fine. No, you didn't hurt my feelings. I'm happy for you. The philosopher Immanuel Kant famously rejected all lying, even to save a life. For him, truth was an absolute duty. If you lie to a murderer at the door, even to protect a victim, you've corrupted your moral law. You've used language to control reality. But this view, pushed to its limit, produces something unlivable. You tell your friend that their child is unattractive. You tell your dying mother that she has 2 days to live, not 5. You confess every romantic regret, every passing cruelty, every selfish thought, not because you want to, because you must. Truth becomes violence, not through intention, but through exposure. And yet, lying has always carried that same violence. Lying about weapons of mass destruction. Lying on resumes. In marriages. In war. Lying through silence. Lying through denial. Lies shape history. Lies kill. Lies comfort. And that's what makes this ethical fracture impossible to smooth over. What if ethics requires deception to function? Nietzsche believed it did. For him, truth wasn't a virtue. It was a weapon used by the weak to control the strong. Lies were creative, necessary, even noble. Civilization, he argued, was built not on truth, but on the ability to pretend. But others saw something darker. Hannah Arendt warned that totalitarianism begins when lies stop being exceptions and become reality. Not because people believe the lies, but because truth becomes irrelevant. In that world, forcing everyone to speak truth might seem like salvation, but truth, unleashed without filter, becomes something else. Raw power. Suppose your employer asks if you're thinking about quitting. You are. You say yes. You're fired on the spot. Suppose your spouse asks if you still find them attractive. You hesitate. That pause ruins everything. Suppose your government asks you to report any illegal activity among friends. You can't lie. You confess. They're arrested. Suddenly, honesty isn't virtuous. It's compulsory. And that shift from morality to surveillance is where the horror begins. Because truth, when it stops being voluntary, becomes a tool of control. It stops serving relationships and starts serving systems. No more privacy. No more inner life. You say what is true because you can't not say it. And so the ethical question fractures again. Lying is dangerous, but enforced truth is worse. Because when you ban the lie, you don't just ban deceit. You ban mercy. You ban imagination. You ban all the quiet spaces where people protect each other with silence. You create a world where every passing thought is spoken, every fear, every judgment, every betrayal that might never have happened. There are no secrets, only confessions. And you may find that truth, stripped of discretion, doesn't make people good. It just makes them naked. And in that world, people don't become more honest. They become more afraid, more cruel, more alone. And they learn very quickly not how to lie, but how not to feel. The inherited crime. Apologize for your ancestors' genocide. You weren't there. The land was taken a century before you were born. The slaves died generations before your name existed. The forced labor, the massacres, the sterilizations, they're all in the history books. Not your doing, not your choice. You read about them in school, watched the documentaries, maybe visited the monuments, and now you're being asked to apologize. Not as a formality, as an act of moral responsibility. Because your family, your bloodline, was on the other side. And you wonder, is guilt something that can be inherited? This is the fracture of historical responsibility, when morality is no longer about what you did, but what was done in your name before you were born. Legally, you're clean. Morally, less certain, because you benefit. The wealth didn't disappear. The land wasn't returned. The systems didn't dissolve. When the crimes ended, you live inside them. Your education, your passport, your citizenship, your safety, all resting quietly on the bones of those who didn't survive. And the question isn't whether you're guilty. The question is whether you're obligated. Some say no. Guilt requires agency. If you didn't participate, you're not accountable. A person is only responsible for what they choose. But this depends on a model of morality that ends at the individual. Philosopher Karl Jaspers disagreed. After World War II, he described metaphysical guilt, the idea that existing inside a system that allowed atrocity places a burden on everyone within it, not because they caused the crime, but because they lived through it without breaking it. Extend that logic through time. If your family gained from genocide, then even if you didn't fire the shot, your life was shaped by where the bullet landed. Now shift to the philosopher Hannah Arendt. She drew a sharp line between guilt and collective responsibility. Not everyone is guilty, but everyone is responsible for what's done in their name, especially when they benefit. You didn't enslave anyone, but you live in a world built by those who did. Your comfort is not neutral. It's the aftershock of violence. So what's the moral response? Do you apologize? What does that even mean? If it's just words, is it enough? If it's followed by nothing, no restitution, no policy, no cost, is it just another way to protect yourself from discomfort? And if you refuse, if you say, that wasn't me, do you also reject the comfort that came with it? Do you give back the inheritance? Do you forfeit the privilege? You won't. Most people won't. They'll say, it's complicated. That was a different time. Everyone's ancestors did something. And the moral structure collapses, because it becomes easier to bury the past than to re-enter it. But history doesn't disappear when you close the book. It persists in borders, prisons, languages, surnames, in the air of cities built on blood, and that leaves you in an impossible space. You didn't do it, but you're standing on it. And you have to decide, is silence neutrality, or is it inheritance?